He was once a mortal fisherman, simple, quiet, devoted to the tides. Yet one moment by the sea would unravel the fragile barrier between man and God. Glaucus, whose hands once held the humble net, would taste a blade of divine grass that changed his fate forever. His heartbeat slowed, his breath became the ocean's own rhythm, and his skin shimmered blue with immortality. But divinity is never a gift freely given. Beneath the calm surface waited love's madness, a goddess's scorn, and the judgment of the deep. What secret did the sea whisper to him that no mortal was meant to hear? And why did the gods of Olympus never forgive a fisherman who dared to live forever? Before the world called him a god, Glaucus was simply a man who loved the ocean more than sleep. He lived on the eastern coast of Boeotia, where the mountains bowed down to meet the waves, and the air forever smelled of brine and cedar. His home was a single hut woven from reeds, its walls bleached by the wind. Inside, there was little: a net, a knife, and a clay jar of olives that never seemed to empty. The villagers pitied him. He spoke little, laughed rarely, and seemed content to drift through life as quietly as driftwood. Yet those who met his eyes swore they saw the sea inside them, vast, calm, unknowable. Sailors claimed that he could predict storms simply by the taste of the breeze. Children believed he spoke to dolphins. He never corrected them, perhaps because even he sensed that something beyond reason tugged at his fate, a slow, invisible current pulling him toward a shore unseen. At dawn, when the sea lay smooth as glass, Glaucus would row his small wooden boat beyond the breakers. The water shimmered gold under the rising sun, and every cast of his net felt like a prayer to something older than Olympus itself. He worked not for wealth but for rhythm, the rise, the fall, the pull, the release. To him, fishing was not survival. It was meditation. But the villagers whispered, "A man who never fails at sea must be in league with gods," they said. Some offered him bread in gratitude for safe voyages. Others crossed themselves in fear when he passed. Glaucus cared little for their talk. The sea, after all, kept its own counsel. Yet even he could feel that the ocean had begun to watch him. Its waves broke differently when he stood near. Its winds paused, as though waiting for his command. One evening, as twilight bled purple over the horizon, he sat alone by his nets. The air was thick with the scent of salt and damp rope. The gulls screamed above, circling the remnants of his day's catch. It was an ordinary sight until one fish twitched, then another, then all of them. Glaucus blinked. The fish, freshly pulled from the depths, began to move as though life itself had returned to their scales. One by one, they flung themselves back into the sea. Every last one, their silver bodies flashing in the dying light. He stared at the empty nets. The silence that followed was not of peace, but of revelation. Somewhere deep inside, something stirred, the first ripple of a destiny he could neither name nor escape. The next morning, the villagers found him standing at the shore, still staring at the place where the fish had vanished. "Bad omen," they muttered, but Glaucus did not answer. His thoughts were no longer anchored to the land. That night, sleep eluded him. He dreamed of waves whispering in human tongues, of eyes like pearls watching from beneath the surface. When he woke, the sound of the sea still filled his ears. Rhythmic, beckoning, alive. He knew then that his life was no longer his own. And when dawn came again, he would return to that same patch of shore, searching for the secret the tide had shown him. But what secret waits for a man who listens too closely to the sea? The morning sun spilled across the sea like liquid bronze. Glaucus stood barefoot on the rocks, his net coiled over one shoulder, eyes fixed on the tide that had haunted his dreams. He could not forget the impossible sight of yesterday. Fish that had returned to life, vanishing in a shimmer of scales. Logic told him it was madness, yet something deeper whispered that the sea was not done speaking. He rowed out farther than before, past the headland where the cliffs broke into foam. The water was still, the kind of calm that precedes revelation. When he cast his net, it sank soundlessly into the depths. Moments later, it tugged with a force so sudden that the oarlocks groaned. He pulled, hand over hand, muscles trembling. But what rose from below was not weight, it was movement. The net erupted in silver. Dozens of fish flailed violently, yet their eyes were wide and aware, as though pleading. Glaucus dragged them aboard, breathing heavily, and laid them on the deck. Each one glistened unnaturally. Not the dull sheen of death, but the shimmer of a heartbeat returning. Then it happened again. Before his eyes, the fish began to stir. Their fins twitched, their gills fluttered. One leapt from the deck with startling force, splashing into the waves. Then another, and another. The sea seemed to call them home. In seconds, his catch was gone. Only damp scales remained. Glaucus froze. The silence that followed felt alive, charged with the weight of unseen eyes. He knelt and touched the planks where the fish had lain. The wood was wet, but the moisture glowed faintly green, almost luminous, as though the sea had branded his boat with its touch. He rowed back to shore in silence. The villagers saw the empty nets and laughed. "The ocean tires of you, fishermen," they jeered. But Glaucus heard only the whisper of the surf. He returned to the very place where the miracle had begun, the same rocky patch where the fish had revived before returning to the water. There, clinging to the stone, grew a small patch of grass unlike any he had ever seen. Its blades shimmered as though dusted with gold, moving gently though the air was still. The scent was faintly sweet, a mixture of salt and something ancient, something alive. He crouched, tracing the edges of the grass with trembling fingers. It pulsed faintly beneath his touch, like the slow beat of a heart. He thought of the fish, of their rebirth, and for the first time the thought occurred to him, what if the grass held the secret? Curiosity is the first sin of transformation. He tore a handful and lifted it to his nose. The scent deepened, almost intoxicating. Then, almost without thought, he placed a single blade on his tongue. The taste was sharp, metallic, electric. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the world convulsed. The sky darkened. The waves roared as though struck by thunder. Pain surged through his veins, not pain of the body, but of becoming. His heart stuttered, then pounded with an alien rhythm. He fell to his knees, clutching his chest, as light burst beneath his skin in tendrils of green and blue. His veins glowed. His breath came shallow and strange, half air, half water. The sea began to rise. Glaucus staggered toward the surf, driven by instinct, by terror. The waves broke over him, icy and merciless. He gasped, but instead of drowning, his body remembered. His lungs accepted the water. His skin cooled, shifting to a hue like the twilight depths. The world above blurred, fading into blue light. He opened his eyes and found himself beneath. The surface shimmered above like glass. All sound was distant, dreamlike. Around him, the ocean pulsed with life. Ribbons of kelp, darting schools of fish, faint voices humming in tones no human tongue could form. His mind spun between awe and horror. He should have died, yet he had never felt more awake. In the distance, something vast stirred. Shapes glided through the water, forms too large and slow to be fish. A hand, translucent and scaled, reached toward him, not threatening, welcoming. A voice followed, neither male nor female, ancient as the tide itself. "Breathe, Glaucus. The sea remembers its own." He tried to speak, but bubbles escaped instead of words. He sank lower, feeling the pressure of the deep embrace him. His mortal body no longer resisted. It adapted, bones shifting, muscles lightening. The seaweed brushed his skin like fingers of silk. When he looked down at his reflection, it was gone. The face that stared back was no longer that of a fisherman, but of something half divine. His eyes glowed faintly, mirroring the phosphorescent depths. He had crossed the threshold, and as he drifted into the growing dark, one thought echoed through him like a prayer unanswered. "What have I done?" The last of his breath turned to bubbles, rising toward the dim sun above, the final exhalation of the man he had been. Below, the ocean opened its arms. He would not rise again. But what does the ocean demand in exchange for eternal life? The sea swallowed him whole. But it did not destroy him. Glaucus drifted downward, arms open, eyes wide in terror and awe. The sunlight fractured into pale ribbons above, breaking against the trembling surface as he sank deeper. The silence was overwhelming, a living silence, immense and endless. Each beat of his heart echoed like a drum through the water, until even that began to slow. He felt the last breath of air leave his chest, replaced by a desperate, instinctive gasp. Yet the agony of drowning never came. Water filled his lungs, not as death, but as life. His body accepted it, adapting, reshaping. His skin shimmered with a faint green-blue glow, veins tracing like rivers of light beneath the surface. His hair streamed behind him in strands of silver. The man who had once rowed wooden boats had become something unbound. A voice hummed through the water, low, melodic, older than words. It surrounded him, pulsing through the current like a song sung by the tide itself. "Do not fear, child of the shore," it said, "not through sound, but through sensation. You have crossed the veil between breath and tide. You are ours now." Shapes appeared from the darkness. Pale figures glided from the depths, nymphs, daughters of the sea. Their eyes were like pearls, their laughter like the chime of shells. They circled him curiously, whispering in a language he half understood. One touched his cheek with a hand as cool as moonlight. "He still remembers the air," she murmured. "He is not yet of the deep." Then came another, a vast shadow parting the blue. A figure older, larger, crowned in coral. The old man of the sea, Nereus, keeper of wisdom beneath the waves. His beard flowed like seagrass. His skin bore the marks of eternity. His gaze settled upon Glaucus, calm yet terrible in its knowing. "You have eaten what mortals were never meant to taste," Nereus said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "The herb of transformation, it grows only where the divine has wept upon the earth. You have consumed the sorrow of the sea itself." Glaucus tried to speak, but only bubbles escaped. Still, his thoughts reached outward. "Why me? Why was I chosen?" The old god's expression softened. "The sea chooses no one. It remembers all. You stood too long at its edge, listening. You loved its silence, its storms. And what we love, we eventually become." The words struck him like the pull of a tide. Love, that quiet devotion he had offered the waves each morning, had been his undoing and his awakening both. Nereus extended his staff, carved from whalebone and encrusted with salt. "Breathe again, Glaucus of Boeotia." As the staff touched his shoulder, a flood of memory and sensation surged through him. The cries of sailors lost in storms, the pulse of leviathans sleeping beneath trenches, the hum of coral cities unseen by mortals. It was too much. His mind reeled as the immensity of the ocean pressed into his skull. He screamed. A soundless burst of bubbles, and light exploded from him. When it faded, he could stand upon the seabed without effort. His eyes could see in the murk colors unimagined. His voice, when he spoke, echoed softly, perfectly clear through the water. "What am I?" Nereus smiled, a weary smile that had seen countless transformations. "Neither god nor man. You are the current between, the tidewalker, the one who will remember what both worlds forget." The nymphs cheered softly, spinning in the water, their laughter rising like music. Yet beneath their joy, Glaucus felt a chill of foreboding. The sea was vast, but so was its loneliness. Nereus turned and gestured toward the distance. "Come, there is much to learn. The sea keeps many secrets, and its gifts demand balance." They swam for what felt like hours, through forests of kelp that shimmered like emerald flame, past ruins of temples long drowned by forgotten floods. Statues of gods stood half-buried in sand, their faces eroded but their eyes still watching. Schools of silver fish parted to let them pass, forming living constellations. In that vast, quiet world, Glaucus felt both infinite and small. The deeper they went, the less he remembered of air, of hunger, of the ache of mortal life. Yet one memory clung to him like a thread of sunlight. The shore, the laughter of gulls, and the face of a girl who once sold fish in the marketplace. A reminder that he had once been human. Nereus noticed his silence. "You grieve the world above," he said. "Do not. The sea grants wisdom where the sky grants ignorance. But beware, Glaucus. Every gift bears a debt. A debt. Immortality is not the freedom you think it is. It is the weight of memory that never fades. The tides will know your joy and your sorrow alike. And one day, you will understand why we envy mortals their end." The words lingered like an undertow, dragging at his thoughts. Glaucus looked upward, to the faint glimmer of daylight above. So far it might have been another world. The sea was beautiful. The sea was endless. The sea was a cage made of wonder. He closed his eyes and listened, to the pulse of the currents, to the whispers of ancient gods sleeping in trenches, to the call of something still unfinished inside him. He had been baptized not by water, but by fate. And though the sea had given him breath, he could not yet tell if it had spared him, or claimed him completely. Can one still love the surface once the sea has claimed his soul? The ocean has no silence. Even in its stillness, something always breathes beneath. A whisper through the currents, a memory echoing between waves. Glaucus was beginning to understand that the sea itself remembered. Days, or perhaps centuries, passed, though time was a meaningless creature here. He wandered through corridors of coral, guided by the faint blue fire that glowed in his veins. The nymphs sometimes followed, watching him with the curiosity mortals reserve for miracles. They spoke in riddles, sang in fragments of prophecy. And every so often, he would hear Nereus's voice ripple across the distance. "All gifts are debts, Glaucus. Even the ocean must collect." At first, he dismissed it as a warning meant for others. But the deeper he went, the more the words grew teeth. One evening, if one could call it evening beneath the water, the sea darkened to ink. The coral dimmed, and a tremor passed through the current. The nymphs vanished in fear, leaving only silence. From the shadows emerged a vast figure draped in strands of kelp and shells, eyes like moonstones, face carved by eternity. It was the oracle of the tides, the keeper of the ocean's truth, a being said to exist before Poseidon himself claimed dominion. She rose from the depths like a vision of both death and beauty, her form shifting with every movement, neither solid nor spectral. Glaucus bowed instinctively, though his heart quaked. "Great oracle," he said, his voice echoing through the water. "Tell me what debt I owe for the gift I did not ask for." Her laughter was soft, sorrowful. "You have eaten of the divine, mortal born. The herb that touched your lips once grew from the tears of the first sea god, fallen upon a shore that no longer exists. You drank the sorrow of the eternal, and sorrow will now drink you." He frowned. "I sought no immortality. None ever do," she replied, her voice low as thunder across sand. "Yet the waves chose you because you listened. You loved the sea not for power, but for peace, and so it made you its echo. But echoes must travel, Glaucus. You cannot stay." Her words rippled through him. He had thought himself safe beneath the surface, free from hunger, pain, and aging. But the oracle's eyes pierced him, seeing further, deeper. "You belong to both worlds now. The land will forget you, the sea will never claim you fully. Between these realms, you will wander, messenger, guardian, and exile." The weight of it sank through him like cold stone. "Then what purpose remains for me?" She smiled, a sad smile that stirred the water like a sigh. "Love." He blinked. "Love. Love, Glaucus, the oldest current of all. It will lift you and it will drown you. Through it, you will know the sea's greatest secret, that even gods ache to be known." Her form began to fade into mist. "You will soon meet her, the one whose name will change your fate." "Who?" he demanded. "Tell me her name." But the oracle only whispered as she dissolved into foam. "Beware the shore, for what the ocean gives, it can never take back without sorrow." The light dimmed, and she was gone. When Glaucus returned to the shallower waters, the world above called to him like a forgotten dream. He rose toward it slowly, the the surface trembling like a mirror between realities. As he broke through, sunlight struck his face. Sharp, alien, holy. The air burned his lungs. The sound of gulls made him flinch. But oh, how beautiful it was, that fragile, fleeting world of imperfection. He could hear the distant laughter of mortals, the clatter of oars, the scent of pine and salt mingling like a memory reborn. He drifted near the rocks, careful to hide his now azure skin. For the first time in what felt like an age, his heart beat with the rhythm of longing, not for the sea, but for something human. And then he saw her, a girl, slender and sunlit, walking barefoot along the cliffside, gathering shells. Her hair caught the wind like golden threads. Her voice hummed a melody older than temples. She moved with the ease of someone who trusted the world not to harm her. The name came to him without thought, as though whispered by the oracle's departing breath. Scylla. Glaucus felt his pulse quicken, an echo of the human he had been. Yet beneath the awe, a tremor of fear grew. The oracle's words returned. You will soon meet her. He sank back beneath the surface, hidden by the current, watching her reflection ripple. She leaned over to gaze into the water, and for a heartbeat, their eyes met, mortal brown meeting ocean blue. She gasped and stepped back, clutching her cloak. He remained still, afraid to speak, afraid to break whatever fragile thread bound their fates together. The sea around him seemed to hold its breath. Who are you? Her voice called softly. Glaucus hesitated, then whispered, though his words barely reached the air. A friend of the waves. Scylla tilted her head, searching the water's depths. But the figure she glimpsed was only a shimmer of blue light. When she finally turned away, Glaucus exhaled slowly, realizing he had not truly breathed since seeing her. He retreated to the deep, haunted not by fear but by wonder. Could a god love a mortal? Could something eternal find peace in something fleeting? He remembered the oracle's final warning. Love will lift you and drown you. In that moment, Glaucus understood the cruel paradox of immortality. To live forever was to love what would always fade. Yet even knowing that, he felt the pull, the quiet gravity of Scylla's presence, and he knew he would surface again. Far below, unseen, Nereus watched the young sea god drift between two worlds. He sighed, the sound rolling through the ocean like a slow drumbeat. So it begins again, he murmured. Another tide drawn toward the shore, because in every age, the sea sends forth one of its own, to love, to lose, and to remind the waters why they weep. Who could make a god bleed from the heart? The morning came painted in soft gold. Mist curled over the sea like breath, and every ripple caught the newborn light. Beneath that veil of calm, Glaucus waited, half submerged, half hidden, watching the shore where destiny had taken shape in the form of a mortal girl. Scylla. Even her name carried rhythm, as though the syllables themselves were born from the waves. She walked along the cliff's narrow path each dawn, unaware that the god of the tides watched her from below. She was the daughter of Cratyius, a nymph of river and mountain. But Scylla's heart belonged to the open air. She laughed easily, sang while collecting shells, and spoke to the gulls as if they were her kin. Glaucus had seen countless wonders beneath the sea. Palaces of coral, spirits of foam, beasts that glowed brighter than the moon. Yet none of them stirred him as she did. There was no grandeur in her beauty. It was her aliveness that pierced him. The way her hair caught the wind, the way her shadow met the water's edge and lingered there, unaware of the god watching from the deep. He rose cautiously, letting only his eyes breach the surface. The waves lapped gently at the rocks, and through them he whispered her name, a sound that drifted to her as nothing more than a breeze. She paused, sensing something. Her gaze turned toward the water. For an instant, she thought she saw a face beneath the reflection, human but luminous. The image vanished as quickly as it came, swallowed by the tide. Scylla smiled nervously. Strange sea, she murmured. Glaucus sank back into the blue, his heart thundering. Gods were not meant to feel this fragile, this mortal. Yet love does not obey titles. It simply pulls. That night, as moonlight poured across the waves, he sought counsel from Nereus. The old god rested among anemones that glowed like dying embers. "I have seen the mortal," Glaucus confessed, his voice low, trembling between defiance and desperation. "And I cannot unsee her." Nereus's eyes opened slowly. "Then your suffering begins." "She is pure," Glaucus said, "untouched by vanity or greed. She could love without fear." The old god smiled sadly. "Mortals love because they must. Gods love because they cannot help it. But you stand between. That is the cruelest place to be." Glaucus clenched his fists. "There must be a way. A gift. A gesture. Something that could show her I mean no harm." "The sea gives nothing freely," Nereus replied, "and mortals fear what they do not understand. You would terrify her, Glaucus. To her eyes, you are a creature of nightmares, not devotion." But reason could not cage longing. For nights he returned to the shore, unseen but present. He left offerings where she walked, a pearl shaped like a tear, a coral branch that shimmered like rose-gold flame. She found them and wondered which god favored her so. She began to speak softly to the water, laughing as though conversing with the sea itself. And Glaucus answered, hidden beneath the waves, his voice carried by the current. "Who are you?" she asked one morning, crouching by the water's edge. "Someone who loves what the world forgets," he replied. The words echoed faintly around her, like the sea confessing its own secrets. Scylla looked toward the horizon, her brow furrowed. "Then the sea must be very lonely." He smiled, a soundless, aching thing. In the days that followed, her visits grew longer. She began to sit on the rocks, humming while the waves brushed her feet. And Glaucus, hovering just beyond her sight, felt a strange peace bloom within him. For the first time since his transformation, he did not curse the ocean. He thanked it, yet peace is a fragile tide. One wrong current and it breaks. Word of the blue-skinned stranger reached Circe, the sorceress of A, daughter of Helios and wielder of transformations. Her island was far to the west, yet she felt the tremor of this new god's emergence. A mortal made divine? Such things defied order. Curiosity, or perhaps envy, kindled in her heart. From her mirror of obsidian, she watched Glaucus rise from the surf to whisper at Scylla's feet. She saw his tenderness, his longing, and her lips curved in intrigue. "A god who begs for love," she mused. "How easily beauty unravels even the divine." Circe's laughter rippled through the air like perfume and venom intertwined. "If he desires mortal affection, let him come to me. I can make her love him or destroy them both." Back on the Boeotian shore, Scylla's curiosity deepened. One evening, she knelt close to the water and whispered, "If you are real, show me your face." Glaucus hesitated. The sea within him warned of danger, but the pull of her voice was stronger. Slowly he rose from the waves. Moonlight caught his form, the gleaming scales along his arms, the faint glow of his eyes, the tangled hair flowing like seaweed. He was beautiful but otherworldly, more dream than man. Scylla gasped, stepping back. "You're a friend," he said softly. "I mean you no harm." She stared, heart racing, torn between wonder and fear. "You're not mortal." "No," he admitted. "But I was, once." She reached out a trembling hand, then drew it back. "Why come to me?" "Because your voice reached farther than the wind," he said. "Because when the sea listens, it hears only you." The moment hung fragile as glass between them, but as Scylla's fear softened into awe, the wind shifted. The scent of distant flowers, strange, intoxicating, drifted across the water. Circe was listening. The sea stirred, uneasy. Somewhere deep below, Nereus sighed. The oracle's warning began to echo again. Love will lift you and drown you. Glaucus did not yet understand. He only knew that for the first time since leaving the shore as a mortal, he felt alive again. What would a god risk to win mortal affection? The sea carried Glaucus far from Boeotia that night, though he could not tell whether it was the wind or his own confusion that drove him. Love had changed the current of his thoughts. It pulled at him with more force than the tides ever could. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Scylla's face illuminated by moonlight, curious, fearful, wondrous. He had shown himself too soon, and the human world was not made to understand gods who still remembered what it was to be men. When dawn broke, Glaucus floated in open water, surrounded by nothing but horizon. The sun was sharp, relentless, his heart heavier than stone. The nymphs had told him of one who might help, a woman who knew the language of transformation, who could command love as easily as wind. Circe. Her name traveled through the sea like rumor and prayer. Daughter of Helios, sister to Pasiphae, mistress of potions and enchantments. The gods of Olympus distrusted her. Mortals both worshipped and feared her. They said she could weave desire from sunlight, twist loyalty from a name. To Glaucus, she was hope wearing a dangerous smile. He dove deep, following the warm current that led west toward Aa. Days passed, or perhaps hours. Time again slipped between waves. Finally, her island rose before him. Cliffs of obsidian streaked with gold, forests humming with the songs of creatures no longer entirely mortal. As he approached the shore, the air thickened with fragrance, herbs, smoke, and something sharper. He stepped from the sea, the water clinging to his skin like glass, and began to climb. Circe awaited him. She stood upon the rocks barefoot, her robe the color of sunrise, her hair a cascade of burnished copper. Her eyes glowed with the calm of someone who already knew why he had come. "So," she said softly, "the sea sends me another broken thing." Glaucus hesitated, startled by her beauty and by the weight of her gaze. "I am no supplicant," he said, "only a soul seeking guidance." "Then you are both," she replied, smiling. "For guidance is the prayer of the desperate." He bowed his head. "I seek a draught, a potion that can make a mortal see as the gods see. I would have her love me not from fear, but from truth." Circe circled him slowly, her bare feet barely touching the stone. "And who is this her that bends a god to trembling?" "Her name is Scylla," he said, the word itself a sigh. "She walks the Boeotian cliffs. She fears what I have become." Circe stopped. Something flickered behind her eyes. Interest, envy, maybe pity. "And so you would use magic to win her heart?" "I would use anything that brings her peace," he answered. The sorceress studied him for a long time. "You speak as though love were mercy. It is not. It is hunger. It devours, transforms. You should know that by now." Her words struck deep, yet Glaucus met her gaze. "Then teach me how to wield that hunger without harm." Circe turned away, her robe whispering over the stone. "You ask for a dangerous gift, Seaborn. Magic cannot give love. It can only reveal what lies beneath desire." "Then let it reveal her heart," he said. "Let her see mine within it." A silence stretched between them, the kind that tests the strength of conviction. Then slowly Circe smiled. "Very well. Come." She led him through groves that shimmered with unseen energy. Vines curled toward her as she passed. Birds with golden feathers called his name in strange, human tones. Within her dwelling, a hall carved from the cliff itself, cauldrons simmered, filling the air with warmth and shadow. Circe gathered herbs that glowed faintly in the dimness. "Do you know," she said softly, "that every spell requires sacrifice? Not of blood, but of truth. So tell me, Glaucus, do you love her? Or do you love how she makes you feel human again?" Glaucus faltered. The question struck too close to the bone. "I love her because she reminds me of everything worth being mortal for." Circe's expression darkened, though her voice remained gentle. "Ah, then it is not her you seek to enchant, but yourself." Still, she poured shimmering liquid into a chalice, green as the sea and heavy with fragrance. "Take this to her," she said. "Pour it into the tide where she bathes. Let the water carry its truth to her heart. If she is meant to love you, she will." Glaucus took the cup with reverence. "And if she is not?" Then love will take its true form, Circe whispered, and all masks will fall. Her gaze lingered on him longer than it should have. There was no hatred in it, only something tender, yearning, impossible. Stay, Glaucus. Forget this mortal. Let the world above fade. The sea has already claimed you. Why fight it? He shook his head. Because I remember the sun. A faint tremor crossed her lips. Then go, foolish god. But when your heart breaks, and it will, remember that Circe offered you sanctuary. He left her island as the wind rose, the sea black with gathering storm. The potion gleamed in his grasp, its surface reflecting the stars. Behind him, on the cliffs of Circe watched, her eyes glistening not with anger, but with something far more dangerous. Desire unreturned. Love denied becomes prophecy. She whispered into the wind, her words vanishing into the dark. If I cannot heal him, let him remember me when he weeps. Far ahead, unaware, Glaucus swam toward Boeotia with hope burning in his chest, and a goddess's curse trailing quietly behind. What happens when the healer becomes the curse? The journey back to Boeotia was long and restless. Each wave seemed to whisper Scylla's name, urging Glaucus onward. The potion from Circe pulsed faintly within the conch vessel he carried. A luminous green, alive as though the sea itself breathed within it. The closer he came to the shore, the more his heart quickened. Hope can be a dangerous current. It carries even gods beyond reason. By the time he reached the familiar cliffs, dusk had fallen. The air was warm, threaded with salt and jasmine. He could see her silhouette against the twilight, Scylla, walking along the rocks, her hair catching the dying light. She was singing softly, a mortal song about the sea's mercy, unaware that mercy was the very thing that stalked her. Glaucus hid beneath the waves, waiting for the moment when she would wade into the shallows as she often did. The oracle's warning still echoed faintly in his mind. Love will lift you and drown you, but he silenced it. What did the gods know of love's urgency? He had crossed death itself for this chance. When Scylla stepped into the water, Glaucus emerged. His form shimmered in the moonlight, a figure of ocean and sorrow. She gasped, but did not flee this time. Perhaps curiosity had dulled her fear. "Do you come as a god?" she asked softly. "Or as the man you once were?" "As both," he answered. "And neither. I come as the tide comes, because I must." She smiled faintly, pity flickering across her face. "The sea does not need to love what it touches, Glaucus." "But it can," he said, "and it does." He reached into the water, pouring the potion Circe had given him into the tide around her. The liquid spread like molten emerald, shimmering as it touched the waves. "Let the sea speak my truth," he whispered. The air grew heavy. For a heartbeat, the world held still. Scylla looked down, startled by the light swirling around her feet, a radiance too beautiful to fear. The water began to glow, wrapping around her like a living veil. Then the light shifted. Beauty curdled into horror. Her scream pierced the night. She stumbled backward, clutching her sides as pain racked her body. Her skin rippled, her limbs twisted. Her legs fused into coils of scaled flesh. Her fingers became claws. Her voice broke into an unearthly wail that shook the cliffs. "Scylla!" Glaucus cried, rushing forward, horrified. "No, no, what's happening?" But she could no longer hear him. Her eyes, once warm and human, now blazed with feral terror. She turned toward him, and for an instant he thought she would attack. But instead she fled, plunging into the dark waters, vanishing into the abyss with a sound that was not a splash but a scream swallowed by eternity. The glow faded. The shore returned to silence. Glaucus knelt in the surf, trembling, the empty conch still in his hand. The potion, his act of love, had become a curse. "Circe," he whispered, his voice breaking. "What have you done?" The sea offered no answer. Only the moon reflected his despair. Far away, on Circe watched the scene unfold within the mirror of her cauldron. The image of Scylla's transformation flickered in the smoke, terrible and radiant. Circe's face was unreadable. not triumphant, not cruel, but haunted. She pressed a trembling hand to the surface of the vision. "I warned you," she murmured. "Love is hunger." Yet even she could not deny the ache in her chest. She had wanted him to stay. She had wanted to be the one he sought salvation from. Instead, he had chosen another, and Circe, goddess though she was, had done what wounded hearts do. She had turned her pain into power. She walked to the edge of her island, looking out across the black water. "Forgive me, Glaucus," she whispered, though her voice trembled with something closer to guilt than repentance. "I gave you what you asked for, truth." And in truth, Scylla's heart had never been capable of loving the divine. The potion had only revealed what already lay within her: fear of what she could not understand, the instinct to flee from power she could never possess. Still, Circe wept. Each tear that touched the water became a ripple of flame, fading as quickly as it appeared. Beneath the waves, Glaucus searched frantically for Scylla. He swam through canyons of coral and forests of kelp, calling her name until his throat ached, though no sound could carry far in the endless dark. At last he found her, or what remained of her. She crouched within a hollow of rock, half hidden by shadow. The creature before him was monstrous. 12 legs, 6 gaping maws, and eyes that gleamed with animal anguish. Yet beneath that horror, he could still see flickers of the girl she had been. Her gaze met his, and for a moment recognition shimmered there. "Scylla," he whispered. A low, sorrowful sound escaped her. Not quite a growl, not quite a cry. Then she turned away, retreating deeper into the chasm. He did not follow. He could not. He floated there for a long time, feeling the tide pull gently at his arms. Around him, the sea was calm again, as though nothing had changed. But within him, everything had. The gods above might have called it justice. He called it ruin. He rose slowly to the surface, the moonlight painting his sorrow in silver. For the first time since his transformation, he wished for mortality, not to die but to forget. Because immortality, he now knew, was not endless life. It was endless remembering. Can immortality bear the weight of guilt? The ocean was silent, and yet, everywhere Glaucus swam, it seemed to echo with her scream. It was a sound that did not fade. It haunted the current, trembled through the coral halls, and wove itself into the songs of the whales. Scylla's pain had become part of the sea itself, an immortal wound that throbbed beneath every wave. Glaucus drifted through that silence, his body weightless, his mind heavy. He had not returned to the surface since that night. The sun no longer called to him. Its warmth felt undeserved. Where once he had marveled at the sea's beauty, now every shimmer of light reminded him of what had been lost. He found no comfort in the company of the nymphs, who whispered pity and kept their distance. Even Nereus, the old man of the sea, avoided his gaze. Word had spread through the deep that Glaucus had broken one of the sacred laws, not through defiance, but through love. One evening, Glaucus rested upon a ledge of stone overlooking a trench so deep it seemed to swallow light itself. His reflection wavered faintly on the water's surface above. Blue skin, hollow eyes, the faint glow of sorrow. He spoke softly, to no one and to everything. "She was innocent. I only wanted her to see me." The sea gave no answer, but a current stirred, brushing against him like a sigh. Out of the shadows drifted a familiar figure, the oracle of the tides. Her form shimmered in the dimness, her voice arriving before her face. "You sought love," she said, "and found truth. Is that not the fate of all who dare the divine?" Glaucus bowed his head. "If truth destroys, what mercy lies in knowing?" "Mercy," the oracle replied, "is the silence that follows understanding. You will learn it in time." He looked up at her, bitterness trembling through his words. "I trusted Circe." The oracle's eyes flickered. "Circe gave you what you asked for. But love, Glaucus, cannot be brewed. You asked the sea to change another heart when you had not yet mastered your own." He turned away, his voice cracking. "Then I am cursed." "No," she said softly. "You are consecrated. The sea does not punish. It transforms. Through pain, you will become something greater, though you will never again be what you were. Her words vanished with her image, leaving only the sound of distant wails keening. A hymn of grief sung in the deep. Glaucus swam for days after that, aimless. He wandered through canyons of glowing coral and forests of seaweed that whispered against his skin. Everywhere he felt her absence. Every current carried echoes of her name. He found the cave where Scylla now dwelled, a shadowed cavern carved by tragedy. From within came a faint movement, a low rumble like breathing. He hovered outside, unable to cross the threshold. Once, he might have called her name, but he feared that doing so would break what little peace she had left. Instead, he laid an offering at the entrance. A single pearl, formed from his tears, luminous and pure. "I will guard you," he whispered, "even if you never know it." And he kept his word. When sailors' ships drifted too close to her cliffs, he would stir the waters, steering them away before her hunger woke. When storms gathered, he would calm the sea around her, hoping the quiet would soothe what little humanity might still linger in her heart. It became his purpose, his penance. Yet the gods above were not blind. From their thrones on Olympus, they watched the sea god's sorrow with curiosity. Poseidon, lord of the ocean, spoke first. "A mortal born immortal who defies the natural order," he said. "He meddles with the tides that belong to me." Athena frowned. "He loved as men do, yet suffers as only gods can. There is wisdom in that." But Zeus only chuckled. "Wisdom rarely spares the heart, daughter." And so they left Glaucus to his grief, neither punished nor forgiven. Years passed, or centuries. Time in the ocean flowed differently now. Civilizations rose and fell upon the surface, their songs fading into myth. Yet beneath, Glaucus remained. His legend began to shift among mortals. Sailors spoke of a sea spirit who appeared before shipwrecks, his eyes sorrowful, his hands guiding them away from danger. Others said he haunted the deep, crying the name of a lost love. They called him the weeping god of the shoals. At night, when the moon painted the waves silver, he would rise quietly to the surface. There, he would sit upon the rocks where he had once waited for Scylla, listening to the soft sigh of the tide. Sometimes he thought he could still hear her song, faint, distorted, carried by memory. He would close his eyes and whisper, "If the sea took you, then let it keep me too." The waves would answer only with a gentle lap against stone, as if in consolation. In those quiet hours, Glaucus began to understand the oracle's words. Sorrow, he realized, was not a wound to be healed but a current to be followed. It shaped him, carried him, taught him to see the beauty even in pain. He no longer cursed Circe. He pitied her. He no longer begged the gods for mercy. He had learned that mercy, like love, was never owed, only given freely. And so, Glaucus became the sea's guardian. Not a king, not a tyrant, but a watcher. A spirit of empathy among the depths. He guided, protected, and mourned in equal measure. His heart, though fractured, became vast enough to hold the entire ocean. Still, on quiet nights, he would look toward the cave of Scylla and feel the ache of a love that had never truly died, only transformed. When even the gods turn away, who hears a cry underwater? Years turned like slow tides. Storm after storm reshaped the coasts of men. But beneath the surface, Glaucus remained unchanged. Immortality had become a cage built from memory. He had saved ships from ruin, whispered warnings into the dreams of sailors, and still the ache persisted, the echo of a name that no wave could wash away. He began to wander. From the pillars of Heracles to the cold Black Sea, he drifted across every current known to mortals. To each island he came unseen at first, rising only when despair thickened on the wind. A wrecked crew would glimpse a shimmer of blue between the swells, a hand guiding their mast from the rocks, a voice calm as sleep. Turn east, follow the moon. They never saw his face, yet stories spread. In Rhodes, they called him the helmsman of lost souls. In Crete, the merciful wave. In Lesbos, the ghost of the deep. Each name was a prayer disguised as a legend, and each prayer tethered him a little longer to humanity. But every island reminded him of Scylla. He would rise near some lonely shore, see a girl gathering shells, and his chest would tighten until he fled again into the depths. The sea forgave everything except forgetting. One night, he drifted into waters he did not know, wide, still, strangely bright beneath the moon. The surface looked like liquid glass. Beneath it lay the ruins of a city swallowed centuries before, its columns wrapped in coral, its streets crawling with eels. Glaucus descended through the broken arches, and as he brushed the stones, voices stirred. They were faint, remnants of prayers once offered to forgotten gods. "Deliver us from the waves. Deliver us." He closed his eyes. "I could not deliver even one," he murmured. From the corner of the square, a faint glow rose, an altar still intact. On it burned a small, eternal flame, green as his own veins. He knelt beside it, feeling warmth for the first time in ages. "Perhaps this is what remains of faith," he said aloud. "A light that endures beneath the wreck." Presence stirred behind him. Nereus again, the patient teacher, the sea's oldest conscience. "You wander seeking peace," the elder said. "But peace is not found in distance. It is found when you forgive the tide that carried you." Glaucus turned. "How do I forgive the sea when it took her?" "It did not take," said Nereus. "It transformed. As it transformed you. The sea does not destroy. It remembers differently than you do." He stared into the green flame. "Then why do I feel like it's punishment?" "Because you are its memory," Nereus replied. "You carry what it cannot speak." The old god's form dissolved into ripples, leaving Glaucus alone with the flame. He touched it gently, and a rush of visions filled him. Every sailor he had ever guided, every storm he had stilled, every tear shed in his name. The sea had not been silent after all. It had been listening. When he rose again to the surface, dawn was breaking. The horizon burned crimson, and for the first time in years he felt something like calm. He followed the sunrise until it brought him to a small island untouched by men. A crescent of sand, a single tree bending toward the water. There he rested. Days became weeks, weeks perhaps centuries. He no longer counted. Dolphins came to play near the shallows. Seabirds nested above him. Even the waves gentled their crash, as though unwilling to disturb his thoughts. In that stillness, Glaucus began to speak again, not to gods or ghosts, but to the sea itself. He told it of mortals, of their fragile courage and fleeting joys. He told it of Scylla, whose eyes had taught him that love's tragedy was not its ending, but its endurance. And in return, the sea whispered stories of its own, of coral cities, of creatures unseen by sun, of beauty too vast for sorrow to drown. Slowly, the god and the ocean began to understand one another. One evening, a storm gathered on the horizon. The sky bruised black. The wind howled like an old grief reborn. A merchant ship appeared, caught in the fury, its mast snapping under lightning's strike. Glaucus rose without thought. The waves obeyed him. He guided the ship through the breakers, calming the swells one breath at a time until the storm exhausted itself. When the sailors looked back, they swore they saw a man of blue flame standing upon the sea, smiling. That night, they lit lanterns and sang to him, their voices trembling between fear and gratitude. Glaucus listened from afar, hidden among the rocks. Their song was clumsy, mortal, but it was warm. He realized then that this was his purpose, not to seek redemption, but to grant it. The sea did not need another king. It needed a witness who understood both its beauty and its cruelty. And so he remained the wanderer of isles, the unseen savior whose presence meant storms would break kindly. In every story told about him, he found a fragment of peace. The myths of men became his prayer, their belief his absolution. Still, when the world quieted, he would glance toward the distant cliffs of Scylla's cave and wonder, did she dream? Did she remember the fisherman who once loved her before the gods reshaped them both? The answer never came, but perhaps that was mercy too. because even an immortal heart needs mystery to keep beating. What keeps a god tethered to a past the world forgot? The sea is not without its laws. Every current has a hierarchy, every trench a silent throne. For centuries Glaucus wandered unchecked, answering only to conscience. Yet his compassion had changed the rhythm of the tides. Storms broke where they should have raged, shipwrecks failed to claim their tribute. The balance of the deep had begun to tilt, and the gods had noticed. One night, the ocean grew unnaturally still. The moon hung above like a coin suspended on invisible thread. Then the water itself seemed to divide, revealing a corridor of light descending into darkness. A summons. Glaucus obeyed. He followed the glowing path until the pressure of the deep crushed against him like an embrace. There, in a cavern vast enough to hold mountains, the council of the deep waited. Seated upon thrones of coral and basalt were the sea kings, Nereus the ancient, Pontus the primordial, and at the center Poseidon himself, trident gleaming with storms yet unborn. Around them drifted spirits of drowned cities, mare priests, and leviathans coiled like living cathedrals. Poseidon's voice rolled through the chamber like thunder underwater. "Glaucus of Boeotia," he said, "mortal made divine, we have heard the tremor of your deeds. You save those whom the sea has marked. You calm tempests fated to cleanse. Do you claim authority over the will of the ocean?" Glaucus bowed, though the current fought to keep him upright. "I claim only sorrow, Lord. I have seen too much of death to let it come needlessly." The god's eyes flashed. "Mercy is not our dominion. The sea feeds on renewal, wreck feeds reef feeds life. When you spare the doomed, you deny the cycle." A murmur rippled through the council. Nereus raised a hand. "Yet perhaps compassion has its place even here. The sea feels through him what we have long forgotten, the ache of those who pray to us." Poseidon struck the stone with his trident, silencing him. "And what of the balance, old friend? The mortals grow careless when spared. Fear keeps them humble." Glaucus lifted his gaze. "Fear is not reverence. It is distance. You rule them by terror. I seek to guide them by awe. If they respect the sea for its beauty, they will guard it better than fear ever could." The words fell heavy. No one had spoken to Poseidon so boldly since the age of Titans. The Sea King's expression darkened, but beneath the anger glimmered curiosity, the strange respect one predator holds for another who dares to meet its eyes. "You would make yourself a philosopher of tides," Poseidon said at last. "Then answer this. If a sailor's prayer rises to you and another to me, whose will should the ocean obey?" Glaucus hesitated. "Both," he said finally. "For the ocean has room for more than one heartbeat." The chamber stirred. Even the leviathans seemed to draw closer. Poseidon leaned forward, trident tip inches from Glaucus's chest. "You speak well, too well. Yet words alone cannot rule the waters. Let the sea itself judge you." He gestured, and the floor of the cavern split open, revealing a whirlpool of light. The current seized Glaucus and dragged him downward into its core. Pressure crushed, visions blurred. The memories of every storm he had quelled and every life he had touched swirled before him. Then, from within the maelstrom, a voice not Poseidon's but the ocean's own spoke. "Why do you pity those who fear me?" Glaucus answered without breath. "Because fear blinds them to your beauty. And what do you see that they cannot? That you are both cradle and grave," he thought, "and that love is what keeps the two apart." The current slowed. The light dimmed. When he opened his eyes, he stood again before the council, unharmed but transformed. A faint radiance now traced his skin, and the water around him pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. Poseidon regarded him quietly. "The sea has tested you," he said. "It finds no arrogance, only grief. Grief is heavy. Let it be your anchor." He lowered his trident. "You are neither condemned nor crowned. From this day you will wander as guardian of currents, protector of those who cross them, but never shall you rest among gods or men." A sentence and a mercy in one breath. Glaucus bowed his head. "If exile grants the world safer passage, I accept it." The council dissolved into motion. Nereus passed beside him, whispering, Do not mistake solitude for punishment. Even the sea must sometimes travel alone to understand itself. Then the cavern folded into darkness. When Glaucus rose toward the surface again, he felt the decrease settle into his bones like tide into sand. The water no longer resisted him. It moved with him, obeying his thoughts. Above, the stars looked sharper, nearer, as though approving his humility. He emerged beneath their light, breathing in the night air he once belonged to. The wind tasted different, half blessing, half farewell. He realized then that immortality was not endless life, but endless duty. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled across the horizon, gentle this time. It was Poseidon's acknowledgement, perhaps even respect. Glaucus smiled faintly. The gods had judged him, but in their judgment, he had found a strange kind of peace. The ocean stretched before him, limitless, waiting, and behind its calm face, countless stories yet untold. Can a god argue for the right to feel? The ocean never forgets its verdicts. Once spoken, they ripple through eternity. Glaucus rose from the abyss with Poseidon's decree echoing in his mind. Guardian of currents, protector of those who cross them, but never among gods or men. The words bound him like invisible chains. Freedom wrapped in exile, purpose tangled in solitude. For weeks, or perhaps decades, he wandered through the lower depths, where even light refused to venture. He felt the hum of the planet's pulse beneath him, the slow heartbeat of the world. And yet, within that vast majesty, he had never felt smaller. The Sea Kings had spared him, yes, but mercy from the divine is often heavier than wrath. The sentence was not punishment. It was endurance. Immortality no longer felt like a gift but an endless rehearsal of grief. He drifted among the ruins of drowned kingdoms. Palaces swallowed by silt, columns overgrown with coral, statues staring upward toward the surface as though still waiting for the sun. Each ruin seemed to mirror his own story. Proud forms reclaimed by water, monuments softened by sorrow. Still, he obeyed his command. When storms gathered, he tempered their rage. When sailors prayed, he whispered guidance through the tide. Ships survived where they should have shattered. Islands prospered that might have been lost. His name, once forgotten, began to return to mortal tongues. Fishermen of Lesbos poured wine into the waves and murmured. To Glaucus, the kindly deep, in Sicily, mothers told their children that a blue god guarded the harbors from monsters. And in the quiet corners of the Aegean, sailors claimed they heard his voice at dusk, calm, deep, neither human nor divine. But stories spread upward as well. On Olympus, the gods watched this quiet defiance. Poseidon's domain had always been one of power, storms, vengeance, retribution. But Glaucus ruled by gentleness, and mortals loved him for it. Love, after all, is the one force that gods fear most when it belongs to another. One evening, as crimson light fell over the sea, Poseidon summoned his kin once more. The Sea King's judgment would decide if Glaucus's compassion had unbalanced the tides beyond repair. In the council hall of coral and bone, the water shimmered with divine presence. Poseidon's trident stood planted at the center, a pillar of lightning frozen in motion. Around him gathered the oceanic pantheon, Nereus the wise, Triton the herald, Thetis the deep-minded, and Galatea, spirit of calm waters. His mercy weakens our dominion, Poseidon began, voice resonant as breaking surf. He answers prayers unspoken, spares ships meant for ruin. The mortals have ceased to fear the sea. If this continues, they will forget whom they serve. Triton nodded grimly. Already their hymns praise Glaucus. They offer less to the father of storms. But Galatea tilted her head, silver hair drifting like mist. And yet they offer more to the sea itself. They no longer curse it. They revere it. Perhaps fear was never our only language. A murmur followed. The council divided, half the gods demanding obedience, the others whispering of evolution. Finally, Nereus spoke, his voice soft but sure. You all mistake the purpose of punishment. We condemned Glaucus to solitude, not silence. He has obeyed. His compassion does not defy the sea's will, it fulfills it. For what is the ocean if not both creation and destruction? He merely reminds the mortals of our gentler face. Poseidon's gaze sharpened. And would you have me yield my storms to sentiment? Nereus smiled faintly. Even storms, my lord, long for calm when their work is done. For a moment, the great chamber quivered. Lightning danced within Poseidon's trident, but he did not strike. Instead, he rose, water swirling around him in a spiral of authority. So be it, he declared. Let him keep his vigil, but his name shall never be sung in Olympus. He will walk the waves unseen, the exile of eternity. The council bowed. The judgment stood. When Glaucus heard the words carried by the currents, he did not weep. The sea's voice reached him like an old friend, firm but familiar. Unseen, Poseidon had said, but unseen did not mean unloved. He looked upward through miles of blue water, where sunlight fractured like glass above his head. He thought of mortals sailing those waters, of their laughter, their fear, their songs. None of them would know his face. None would thank him by name. And yet, for the first time, that anonymity felt like peace. He swam upward slowly until the first light touched his hands. The ocean shimmered with life, whales migrating through the deeps, coral blooming in hues of flame and jade. His exile had given him something the gods could never have: perspective. If Olympus was power, then the sea was truth. And truth, he realized, had never needed a throne. He surfaced near a merchant vessel battered by wind. The crew knelt at the railing, praying to every name they knew. He smiled gently, whispering through the waves, "Not every storm means death, little ones." The winds calmed, the waves softened. One sailor swore he saw a flash of blue beneath the surface, eyes kind as the horizon. Glaucus drifted away before dawn, his form fading with the tide. Above him, the constellations mirrored his shape, a man half-submerged, reaching toward heaven but bound forever to the sea. His punishment had become his purpose, his loneliness his strength. The mortals would forget his name again, as all names are forgotten in time. But the mercy he had sown would linger in every calm harbor, every wave that gentled rather than devoured. He was no longer Glaucus the cursed, nor Glaucus the fool in love. He was Glaucus the guardian, a god whose power was measured not in wrath, but in restraint. What becomes of a god when his punishment is solitude? The sea forgets faces, but it never forgets voices. Long after Glaucus vanished from the sight of men, his presence lingered in the rhythm of the waves, in the hush that followed a storm, in the salt-sweet breeze that carried fishermen home. And though Olympus refused his name, mortals began to remember it in song. It started in whispers. On quiet nights along the Boeotian coast, fishermen gathered beside their fires and spoke of a blue shadow that swam beneath their boats. When nets tore, they said, unseen hands mended them. When storms rose, the waves around them grew strangely calm. They sang to thank the sea, and somehow the sea seemed to listen. One old man with a weathered voice hummed the first melody, a simple tune that imitated the rise and fall of the tide. He called it the breath of Glaucus. Its words were few, a prayer disguised as a lullaby. The song spread from shore to shore, carried by travelers and sailors, woven into labor chants and cradle hymns. Blue Father of Mercy, Watcher of nets, guard us from hunger, guard us from depths. Where storms are born, let your heart be near. Glaucus, the gentle, the tide we revere. No temples were built for him. No priests recited his name in marble halls. Yet his worship grew stronger than any decree. Faith that rises from gratitude is quieter than fear, but it endures longer. Glaucus heard the songs. He often surfaced unseen at dusk, resting near fishing boats to listen. Their voices rose above the creak of oars and the hiss of surf, soft but certain. He smiled, feeling something he hadn't felt in centuries: belonging. He swam closer one night, beneath a small boat carrying two brothers and their father. Their nets strained with weight, yet when they pulled them up, not one fish moved. They were all still, glistening as if waiting. The youngest brother sighed. "They'll spoil before dawn. We'll starve." Glaucus exhaled gently. A faint green light spread across the deck, and the fish stirred. One by one, they flopped back to life, diving into the sea. The men froze, their mouths open in awe. "The sea has blessed us," whispered the father. "He asks for nothing, yet gives everything." That night they returned home with empty nets but full hearts. By morning, every fisherman in Boeotia knew the tale. And though no one saw the blue god that night, every man who touched the water felt a pulse beneath their fingers. Steady, kind, ancient. The stories multiplied. In Crete, sailors claimed that when a child was born during a storm, Glaucus would appear in the harbor to still the waves. In Rhodes, they said dolphins swam beside him like loyal hounds, carrying messages from ship to ship. On the coasts of Thrace, divers found pearls shaped like teardrops and called them Glaucus's blessings. Each story changed slightly, but one truth bound them together. Glaucus was no longer feared. He was loved. The god who had once begged for a mortal's affection had become the spirit who taught mortals how to love the sea. Still, not all welcomed his kindness. Far below, the sea kings watched in silence. Poseidon's fury had cooled to caution. "He defies none of my laws," the storm lord admitted to Nereus. "And yet he draws the hearts of men away from me." Nereus smiled. "Perhaps they never belonged to you. Fear can rule bodies, my lord, but not hearts." Poseidon turned away. "He walks a dangerous line. Love breeds devotion, and devotion breeds power. One day he will forget humility." But Glaucus never did. Each night he listened to the songs that bore his name. Each morning, he vanished before the sun could rise high enough to reveal him. He desired no temples, no sacrifices, no crowns. Only the sound of gratitude echoing across the waves. He often thought of Scylla, wondering if she too heard the music through the deep. Sometimes, when the moon was low and the sea perfectly still, he would imagine her voice joining theirs, soft, distant, almost human. It was enough. Centuries later, artists carved his image onto amphory and mosaics. A man with hair of seaweed and eyes like dawnlight beneath water. They painted him guiding ships, blessing nets, cradling dolphins in his arms. To most, he was a symbol, but to a few, he was a living faith. A poet of Miletus wrote, "The storm bows to him who has known sorrow deeper than its rage." A sculptor in Corinth carved his likeness upon a harbor wall, saying, "May the waves see themselves in him and remember gentleness." Such was his quiet dominion, not built from lightning or decree, but from the humility of a fisherman who had once loved too deeply to let the world drown. One night, as Glaucus watched from beneath the surface, a boy began to sing the old melody. His voice cracked with youth but shone with sincerity. The tune had changed slightly over the ages, but the words still called his name. Glaucus closed his eyes, letting the sound wash through him. For a moment, the centuries fell away. He was again a man kneeling on a rocky shore, hearing the tide breathe for the first time. The ocean's pulse matched his own. The curse had become communion. When the song ended, he whispered to the boy's boat, "May your nets always return heavy, and your heart light." The sea shimmered briefly, and the boy felt his or glide easier through the current. He never knew why. He only told his children that the ocean had smiled. How do mortals shape the gods they fear? Far across the wine-dark sea, beyond the singing of the sirens and the islands that drifted like dreams, stood the cliffs of Circe's Isle of Eternal Dusk. There the goddess lived among her beasts, alone with her art and her remorse. Her halls once rang with laughter, but centuries of solitude had reduced them to silence. Vines overgrew the marble, torches burned low, and even her potions cooled into dust. Each night, Circe walked the shoreline where the sea met her exile. The waves whispered names she tried to forget: Odysseus, Helios, Medea, and always Glaucus. At first, she had convinced herself that she had done no wrong. She had only revealed the truth of love's illusion. Yet the centuries had a way of eroding certainty. In the mirror of her still pool, she sometimes saw not her reflection but his, the blue god who had once stood before her, pleading for another's heart. His voice echoed in her memory, quiet and human. Because I remember the sun, now the same sun set beyond her reach each evening, leaving her in a light that never fully died nor fully shone. A half-world, just like him. One evening, as twilight bled into violet, Circe descended the cliff path barefoot. The tide was low, the sand warm. She carried no wand, no potion. Only a shell she had shaped long ago to hear the ocean's breath. She held it to her ear, hoping perhaps for silence. Instead, she heard a song. It was faint, distant, but she knew the melody. The song of the fisherman. Glaucus's name floated within it like a prayer softened by centuries. She sank to her knees, the shell trembling in her hand. They still sing for him, she whispered. Even now. A tear traced down her cheek, falling into the sea. The water shimmered briefly, as if remembering. For the first time since her curse, Circe felt something pierce through the armor of her pride. Not jealousy, not anger, but longing. I gave him eternity, she said to the waves. I gave him purpose. Why does it feel like I stole everything else? The tide offered no reply, only the endless motion of forgiveness that refused to speak its name. That night, Circe could not sleep. She wandered through her halls, lighting old lamps, stirring cauldrons she had sworn never to touch again. Around her, the statues of stone men and beasts seemed to watch in quiet judgment. She moved among them like a ghost, her golden hair dimmed to copper in the weak firelight. At last, she stopped before a mirror. Not of glass, but of dark water framed in silver. With a whisper, she conjured an image upon its surface. The waves within began to ripple, forming the face she had once loved too late. There he was, Glaucus, beneath the starlit sea, his eyes calm, his expression softened by time. Mortals sang above him. The sea bent gently to his will. There was no anger in him now, no desperation, only serenity. Circe reached out, her fingers trembling. You became what I could not, she said. You found peace in the world that broke you. The image flickered. Or perhaps, she continued, you found peace because it broke you. Her reflection wept, though her face did not. Tears fell soundlessly into the mirror, scattering the image into 1,000 tiny waves. Days passed in silence. The animals that roamed her island, lions, wolves, owls with human eyes, watched their mistress with unease. They had seen her rage often. Sorrow was new to them. One morning, Circe gathered herbs again, not to harm, but to heal. She ground them with patience, murmuring no incantations, trusting the earth to do what her magic could not. When she was done, she poured the essence into a small vial of clear glass. To the dolphins that swam near the cliffs, she said, take this to him. Tell him it is not apology, only remembrance. They tilted their sleek heads as if understanding, then vanished into the surf, carrying the vial in their mouths. For days she waited, standing on the shore each dusk until the stars rose. She imagined Glaucus receiving it, wondering, perhaps, whether forgiveness could travel through distance and time. But the dolphins never returned. Whether they lost their way or whether Glaucus refused the gift, she never knew. Still, something within her changed. She began to walk among her beasts without command, freeing many from enchantment. Those who remained came willingly, not out of magic but affection. The air around Aa grew lighter, the water clearer. Regret, it seemed, could cleanse as deeply as it wounded. One evening, as the moon climbed high, Circe felt a current touch her ankles. Cool, deliberate, sent from far away. It wrapped around her feet like a ribbon, whispering a single word she had not expected to hear again. Peace. Her breath caught. She looked out across the moonlit horizon, and for a moment she saw him, Glaucus, standing upon the water's surface, his form a vision of blue flame and calm. He did not speak, but his gaze held no blame. He simply nodded once, as if to say, I have not forgotten you. Then he was gone, the sea folding back into itself as though erasing a dream. Circe stood for a long while, the moonlight trembling in her eyes. "Nor I, Glaucus," she whispered. "Nor I." The waves reached higher, brushing her knees, and she smiled. A smile without power, without sorrow, only understanding. In that moment, the enchantress of Aa became something more and less than divine. A woman who had finally learned to love without needing to possess. Can even magic undo the ache of remorse? There are wounds that time cannot close, only teach one how to live beside. For Glaucus, the centuries had been merciful only in that they blurred pain into devotion. Yet through every tide, one place called to him. The cliffs of Messina, where Scylla's cries had first split the night. Sailors still feared that strait. They told of a monster that dragged ships into darkness, of teeth that shattered hulls and tentacles that clawed for air. But Glaucus knew better. He knew that within the legend still lingered a heart that once beat in rhythm with his own. And so he returned. The journey was long, for he did not swim as before. Now every current seemed to resist, whispering, "Don't reopen what peace has sealed." Yet the pull of memory was stronger than the ocean's command. He followed the coasts of Sicily, through reefs glowing faintly like veins of light, until the water darkened and the current turned violent. Here the sea itself seemed to groan, churning between cliffs that scraped the sky. At dawn, the wind stilled. The mouth of Scylla's cave gaped before him. A wound in the rock, its edges crusted with salt and coral. No birds nested near it. No fish swam close. Even the waves approached timidly, as though bowing to an ancient grief. Glaucus hovered before the entrance, unsure if gods could tremble. The air around the cave pulsed with a rhythm like slow breathing. Shadows moved inside, vast and deliberate. He could sense her there, the creature born of curse and sorrow, the echo of the girl he had loved. He called her name once, softly. "Scylla." The sea shuddered. From the darkness she emerged. The water parted around her monstrous form. 6 long necks, 12 writhing legs, jaws that gleamed like wet marble. Yet her eyes, oh, her eyes were still the color of the old Boeotian sky. They fixed on him, unblinking. Glaucus did not flee. He spread his arms, offering no defense. "I have come not to fight," he said, though his voice was almost lost in the echo. "I have come to remember." Scylla's heads hissed softly, circling him. One lunged close enough for him to feel its breath, hot and salted, but it did not strike. Instead, a sound rose from her, deep, strange, almost like a moan of recognition. For an instant, the many voices within her seemed to merge into one, trembling with something that was not hunger but memory. Glaucus floated nearer. "You were not made for this," he whispered. "You were made for light, for laughter, for the wind on your face." Her jaws opened, and he saw within them not only death, but sorrow unending. He dared to touch one scaled cheek. The skin beneath was cold but alive. The movement that followed was small, almost invisible. A single shiver that rippled through her limbs, like the echo of a sigh. "Do you remember me?" he asked. "The fisherman who loved the sea more than life?" Her eyes flashed. For a moment, the storm within her stilled. A face shimmered within the monstrous form. Faint, flickering, the outline of the girl who had once walked the cliffs. Her lips parted, and from them came a whisper carried on bubbles. "Glaucus?" The name dissolved into water, but it was enough. Tears, or something like them, welled in his eyes. He drew back, knowing that closeness was danger. "I will not ask forgiveness," he said. "I only ask to keep watch, so the world will know your name as more than terror." Scylla lowered her heads. One brushed against his shoulder gently, almost human. Then she turned, retreating into the depths of her cave. The sea swallowed her once more. Glaucus lingered at the entrance, the silence heavy around him. When he looked down, he saw the rocks scattered with bones, remnants of sailors, victims of the curse. He touched one, whispering a blessing. The bones shimmered, dissolving into white coral. Henceforth, he vowed, no ship would meet death here if he could help it. He circled the cliffs, calming the current with every pass, bending the whirlpools into safer paths. The sailors who crossed that narrow channel afterward spoke of a strange peace, as if the sea itself guided them. None knew that a god kept vigil over the monster's lair, watching as the tide ebbed and flowed like the slow breath of redemption. That night, as the moon climbed high, Glaucus rested upon a rock facing the cave. The water shimmered faintly, and he could hear faint movement within, the rhythm of a being half asleep, half remembering. He began to hum, softly, the melody the fisherman sang, the breath of Glaucus. For a time, nothing stirred. Then, from deep within the darkness, another voice joined, rough, broken, but unmistakable. Scylla was humming too. Their voices met where light and shadow crossed, the harmony fragile yet whole. Glaucus closed his eyes. The ache that had once been unbearable now settled into something gentler, a weight that no longer crushed but anchored him. Love, he realized, had not been destroyed by the curse. It had simply changed shape, as all things touched by the sea must. He looked once more toward the cave. "Rest, Scylla," he whispered. "I will be here when you wake." The tide rose, covering his rock, and the moonlight turned the water to silver. From far away, it looked as though the god and the monster had finally found their peace, two shadows merging with the rhythm of the eternal sea. Is love still love when the beloved cannot remember? The air above the Aegean shifted with a tension older than thunder. Far to the west, the horizon bruised black, and the sea beneath it began to tremble. Fishermen smelled the change before they saw it, the sharp tang of lightning wrapped in salt. They whispered a single name in fear and reverence: Glaucus. For weeks, the winds had been strange. Currents reversed their paths. Tides rose against the moon. Something vast was stirring in the heart of the sea. The nymphs whispered that it was not anger, but mourning, a storm born from sorrow. And at its center, Glaucus drifted motionless. His eyes were fixed on the cave of Scylla, the dark mouth that pulsed faintly beneath the waves. She had not stirred for days. He could feel her heartbeat slowing, a fading rhythm deep within the rock. The creature the gods had cursed was dying, not from wounds, but from weariness. He had kept vigil since the first tremor, calming the currents around her, driving away ships that came too near. But now even the sea resisted his command. The water churned with grief not his own. Lightning cracked across the surface, and the first wave rose. Glaucus turned his face toward the sky, eyes glowing faintly against the gathering dark. "If this is how the sea mourns," he whispered, "then let it mourn through me." The storm answered. The winds struck like gods unchained. Waves climbed the height of temples, roaring as if to swallow the sun. Across the isles of Greece, harbors split, ships shattered, and men fell to their knees. Yet amid the chaos, one thing was strange. Not a single life was lost. The winds broke masts, but spared the men who held them. The sea raged, but never consumed. From the cliffs, sailors glimpsed him, a figure of light standing upon the waves, his hair streaming like the tide, his eyes reflecting the storm's fire. Lightning danced across his shoulders without burning him. Each time a wave rose to destroy, his voice calmed it. "Peace," he murmured. "Peace for what was taken, and what was given." He was no longer fighting the storm. He was the storm, shaping it with every breath. Rain and salt blurred together into one vast hymn of grief and grace. In the depths, Scylla stirred. The vibration reached her like a heartbeat returning from the dead. She lifted her head weakly, eyes opening to faint light. The sound that reached her was not thunder, but a familiar song, low, melodic, filled with the weight of memory. Glaucus's voice. Something within her, buried beneath centuries of rage and confusion, began to thaw. The many heads ceased their restless shifting. For a moment, her monstrous heart pulsed in harmony with the rhythm of his voice. She remembered, not his face, not his name, but the feeling of being seen. And in that instant, she let go of her pain. Above, the storm's eye widened, revealing a hollow of calm sky. Glaucus felt the shift in the current and knew. The sea, once violent, began to settle. He looked toward the cave as a surge of light, faint and green, shimmered from within. He swam closer. The water felt warm now, almost gentle. When he entered the cave, Scylla was still. Her body, vast and terrible, had grown quiet, her eyes closing as if in sleep. The air around her vibrated softly, a hum like the last note of a song. Glaucus placed a hand upon her scales. "Rest, my love," he said, voice trembling. "The storm has sung your requiem." A final breath escaped her, rippling through the water. The curse that bound her seemed to loosen, her monstrous limbs softening into mist, her form dissolving into thousands of tiny orbs of light. They floated upward, swirling around him like glowing petals. As the lights rose, Glaucus felt no despair, only release. "Be free," he whispered. The sea answered with silence, not empty, but reverent. When dawn broke, the storm was gone. The waters around the Strait of Messina gleamed calm as glass. Fishermen who ventured there found the sea strangely gentle. Their nets overflowed, and none spoke of monsters again. They said the cliffs sang faintly at dusk, a haunting melody that calmed their fears. They named it the Lament of Aegea, a song said to be composed by the god of the sea himself. Glaucus lingered a while, drifting above the waters where Scylla had vanished. Her memory did not ache now. It glowed quietly within him, the ache of love transformed into reverence. For the first time in eternity he felt balance, a stillness he had never known even in youth. He rose toward the surface, where the morning light broke into shards of gold. Around him, dolphins leapt, their voices bright, carrying fragments of her song. Birds circled overhead, fearless again. The world seemed new. He looked once toward the horizon and murmured, "She was not the curse, but the lesson." Then he dove once more, not to hide, but to serve. The sea had changed, he had changed with it. No longer bound by longing, he became what the waters had always wanted him to be, their conscience. That evening, the mortals saw a vision upon the waves. A blue god standing in a halo of sunset, arms outstretched, the tide glowing faintly around him. They did not know his name, but they felt his peace. When the last light faded, the sea lay still. The storm of Aegea passed into history, told in whispers and song. But for those who listened closely, its echo still lingered in every calm night, every soft tide returning home. And deep beneath the surface, Glaucus smiled, knowing the world would remember not his pain, but his mercy. Can redemption exist without witness? The sea was quiet again. After the storm of Aegea, the waters stretched smooth and endless, a mirror reflecting both heaven and memory. Yet beneath the calm, Glaucus felt a pulse, faint but familiar, the echo of a voice he had not heard since his first days as a god. It came to him in the current, soft as breath. "All gifts are debts, Glaucus. Even the ocean must collect." The oracle of the tides. He had not sought her in centuries, but now, that whisper stirred the depths of his mind like a forgotten wave. The sea around him shimmered, not with light, but with meaning. When the ocean calls an immortal by name, it is never by chance. He followed the current eastward, descending once more into the trenches where no sunlight reached. The pressure grew, heavy enough to crush mountains, but it did not touch him. He moved through it as easily as a thought passing between worlds. At last, the darkness thickened until even the glow of his veins began to fade. Then he saw her. The oracle waited in the same place he had first found her. Seated upon a throne of anemone and bone, her eyes closed, her body half merged with the sea itself. But something had changed. The light that once surrounded her was dimmer now, her face older, her expression softer. She seemed less a goddess than a memory of one. "Glaucus," she said, her voice like water running through stone, "you have carried sorrow to its end. Why have you come?" He bowed. "Because your words never left me. You said all gifts are debts. I have paid mine in grief and solitude. Tell me, is there more yet owed?" The oracle smiled faintly. "There is always more, child of the shore. The sea remembers balance above all. You have given mercy to mortals, peace to monsters, forgiveness to gods. Now the ocean asks one final thing. What thing? He asked. Understanding. The word hung between them, vast and lightless. You have seen love and loss, she continued. You have witnessed beauty become horror and horror become grace. But do you yet understand why? Glaucus hesitated. Because all things change. Because the gods cannot stop what they begin. No, she said gently. Because even the divine must learn what it means to be small. Her eyes opened, glowing with a calm brighter than any sun. The sea is infinite, but its heart is not. It needs remembrance to stay alive. Those who will carry its sorrow, its joy, its story. You are that remembrance, Glaucus. The ocean breathes through you. He looked down at his hands. Then I am nothing but memory. Memory, she said, is what keeps eternity from becoming empty. The words struck him deeper than any prophecy before. He thought of the storm he had calmed, of Scylla's final peace, of Circe's whispered apology carried by dolphins through the years. All of it, tragedy and grace alike, was the sea trying to remember itself through him. And suddenly he understood. The oracle smiled again, as though reading the realization in his silence. You were never punished, Glaucus. You were chosen because you were the only one who listened. Her voice began to fade. The water stirred around her, threads of light unspooling from her body like strands of silk. The sea's debt is paid. But remember, even understanding has a price. What price? He asked quickly. You will know everything that comes, she whispered. But you will never again be surprised. Before he could reply, she dissolved completely, her throne crumbling into sand, her light scattering like dust. The trench fell silent. Glaucus remained there, suspended in stillness, feeling the truth settle within him like the deep itself. He had sought purpose and found wisdom. He had begged for love and found meaning. The sea had not punished him. It had educated him. When he rose toward the surface, he no longer swam as a man or even as a god. He moved like thought, like tide, vast and deliberate. The water parted gently for him, as if acknowledging the understanding he now carried. On the surface, the world had changed again. New ships crossed the horizon, bearing sails of colors unseen in his youth. The mortals had built ports, temples, cities. Yet the songs of the fishermen still lingered, carried through generations, their melody unbroken. He listened as the wind hummed fragments of his own story, the myths that had reshaped into parables of patience, loss, and mercy. He heard his name in a child's prayer, whispered not in fear, but in wonder. That was the sea's true immortality. Not the endlessness of life, but the endlessness of being remembered. Glaucus smiled, realizing the prophecy had completed its circle. Love had led to transformation. Transformation had led to wisdom. And wisdom, this final, quiet understanding, had led him back to love again, the kind that required nothing in return. He closed his eyes, letting the waves cradle him. The current no longer pulled. It embraced. The oracle's voice lingered like the last echo of a dream. You were never the storm, Glaucus. You were the calm that followed it. He sank once more into the depths, not to hide, but to rest. The god who had once fought the tide now drifting as part of it, eternal and at peace. What if immortality was meant not to live forever, but to understand forever? For centuries after the storm of Aegea, the sea held an uncommon calm. Sailors began to trust its mercy again, and in every port they spoke of a blue guardian who had stilled the fury of the waves. From rumor grew reverence, and from reverence, worship. Glaucus, once cursed to wander unseen, became a god remembered. The first shrine rose on a lonely headland of Lesbos. A fisherman whose boat had survived a sudden squall carved a figure from driftwood. A man half fish, half dawnlight. He placed it facing east so the morning sun would touch its brow. Soon others followed. Shells were laid at its base, nets hung like offerings. When storms passed harmlessly, they said the god had accepted their gifts. Word traveled across the islands faster than trade. In Chios, they built a temple of coral and limestone. its pillars carved to resemble breaking waves. In Corinth, mosaics depicted a man of turquoise flesh embracing the horizon. Every harbor had its altar of salt. The prayers differed, but all began with the same words: "To Glaucus, keeper of currents, friend of the humble net." The temples were quiet places, not gilded halls of Olympus but open courtyards washed by tide. Priests were fishermen. Their incense was the smoke of cooking fires. They prayed not for riches but for balance, that the sea might take only what it must. Glaucus watched from beneath the water's skin. He felt their songs vibrate through the currents, each syllable a ripple of gratitude. He had not sought this devotion, yet it comforted him. It meant his story had survived not as tragedy but as lesson. The ocean, once feared, had become a teacher through him. Still, humility kept him distant. When the first priest called out for a sign, Glaucus did not appear in thunder or flame. He sent instead a school of dolphins to circle the temple, their sleek bodies catching the sun like mirrors. The people wept, calling it a miracle. He smiled unseen, content to remain a rumor carried by tides. But gods are not born from worship alone. They are shaped by how men remember them. The stories changed again. Poets claimed Glaucus could hear the thoughts of sailors and judge their honesty. Mothers told their children that if they lied by the sea, the water would turn silent in disapproval. In every telling, mercy and justice intertwined until the line between them blurred. From Olympus, the immortals listened. Poseidon said nothing. Perhaps he saw in Glaucus the reflection of what the sea might have been had it learned gentleness earlier. Perhaps he understood that power untempered by compassion eventually erodes itself. Either way, he allowed the temples to stand. Nereus visited Glaucus once more, appearing as a shimmer of silver foam. "The sea has given you its voice," he said. "Use it wisely. Mortals build altars quickly, but they forget just as fast." Glaucus nodded. "I do not ask them to remember my name, only to remember kindness when they face the storm." Nereus smiled. "Then you are wiser than most who ever sought divinity." The old god vanished, leaving only a trail of calm bubbles that rose to the surface and burst like laughter. Years turned, empires shifted. Ships grew larger, their sails brighter, their ambitions heavier. Yet every vessel still carried a small charm, sometimes a painted eye, sometimes a coin etched with his likeness. When sailors launched, they touched it for luck and whispered, "Guide us, Blue One." One winter, an earthquake struck the Aegean. Waves towered over islands, swallowing entire villages. In the city of Chios, the temple of Glaucus cracked from roof to floor. Its priests, trapped inside, prayed as the sea surged. Then, miraculously, the water stopped at the threshold. It lapped at the doorway but did not enter. When the quake ended, the people said the god had placed his hand against the tide. They rebuilt the temple larger, its new walls adorned with scenes of calm seas and grateful hearts. Glaucus, watching from below, felt no pride, only quiet fulfillment. His purpose had become clear, not to command devotion, but to balance faith with reality. He was the reminder that divinity could be compassionate without losing strength. One evening, as twilight poured across the water, he rose near a new temple built on the Sicilian coast. The priests there had cast a great bell into the sea, forged from bronze and coral dust. Each dawn, they struck it once, letting its note roll across the waves. The sound was deep and resonant, neither joyous nor mournful. It was simply truth. Glaucus hovered beneath it, listening. The bell's vibration passed through him, down into the trenches, through coral forests and bones of whales. It reached the very heart of the sea, and there he heard something extraordinary, a faint answering tone rising from below. The ocean itself was singing back. He understood then that worship was not one-sided. When humans prayed, the sea listened. When the sea replied, it used his voice. He was not an idol, but a bridge between fear and faith, between man and mystery. At dawn, fishermen found the tide covered in strange blossoms, white lilies that had no business growing in salt water. They took it as a blessing, gathering the flowers to float beside the temple steps. No one saw the god beneath them, smiling as he let the petals drift from his open palms. The wind that day was soft, and the water gleamed like glass. Children played at the edge of the surf, throwing stones that skipped farther than they should have. Their laughter carried across the bay, echoing like music. Glaucus watched and thought. Perhaps this was what the oracle had meant by understanding. Not knowing everything, but feeling harmony even amid impermanence. The sea would rise again, storms would return, temples would fall. But for now, balance held. And in that fragile stillness, he felt immortal in the truest sense. Not endless, but remembered. How does faith rewrite memory? Empires rise like tides, slow, relentless, believing themselves eternal. Centuries passed, and the Greeks who had first whispered Glaucus's name were gone. In their place stood a new world. Rome, iron-willed, golden in ambition, and hungry for gods to fill its marble halls. Rome loved to adopt the divine. Every conquered land offered her a fragment of belief, and she, in turn, gave it new shape. When sailors from the Aegean brought stories of a blue-skinned guardian who calmed storms, the Romans listened. They called him Glaucus Propheta, Glaucus the prophetic, the god who foresaw the sea's moods and guided captains safely to shore. Soon his likeness appeared everywhere, on mosaics in villas, carved into fountains, painted on amphorae that held wine from distant islands. To the Greeks, he had been the quiet conscience of the ocean. To the Romans, he became something greater, a symbol of foresight, discipline, and fate. They built temples to him along their harbors, grander than any before. Marble columns rising from the water itself, stairs descending directly into the surf. Priests in white robes kept watch with bronze instruments that measured the tides. They believed that if Glaucus's favor could be read in the height of the waves, entire fleets might survive. But beneath the grandeur, his story was retold, softened, remade, nearly forgotten. They said he had been born not from sorrow, but from destiny. That he had never loved a mortal woman, for gods could not love. That he had risen from the sea already wise, already divine. The tragic fisherman was rewritten into a perfect god. Glaucus watched this new mythology unfold with quiet melancholy. From the depths, he saw men sculpt his image with eyes of marble calm, lips forever smiling, tridents held proudly. They prayed to him for victory and wealth, not mercy, not understanding. The songs of fishermen were gone, replaced by hymns sung by choirs who had never tasted salt on their lips. He drifted through the harbors at night, unseen, listening to his own name misused. The words were beautiful but hollow. Prophetic Glaucus, they sang, foretell the fate of our ships. He longed to whisper back, fate is not a gift. It is a burden. But the wind carried his voice away before any mortal could hear. Yet among the crowds, not all had forgotten the old story. In a small village near Ostia, an elderly Greek sailor still poured wine into the waves each evening. His hands trembled with age, but his voice was steady. To Glaucus, who remembers what men forget, his granddaughter would ask, "Grandfather, why do you pray to a god no one else knows?" And he would smile, eyes glinting with sea-worn wisdom, because he listens even when no one else does. That single act of faith, repeated year after year, reached deeper than the marble temples. It echoed through the water, and Glaucus heard. The sound was small, but it steadied him. It reminded him that true devotion lives not in monuments, but in hearts that whisper when the world has gone quiet. One night, as the Roman harbor gleamed under torchlight, Glaucus surfaced unseen beside the newest temple built in his honor. The moon mirrored itself on the marble stairs where priests were offering thanks for a fleet's safe return. They praised his divine prediction, never knowing that it was not prophecy but compassion that had stilled the storm. A young acolyte lingered behind after the ceremony, his face troubled. "If the god knows all fates," he said aloud, "then what use is prayer?" Glaucus smiled sadly. He rose from the water just enough that his reflection merged with the boy's shadow. "Prayer is not to change fate," he whispered. but to remember that it changes us. The boy froze, sensing the voice but seeing no one. He fell to his knees, whispering, "Who speaks?" "Only the tide," Glaucus said, retreating beneath the waves. The next morning, that boy began a new tradition. Instead of reciting the imperial hymns, he taught the sailors a simpler prayer. The old Greek one, once sung beside fishing fires, "Blue Father of mercy, friend of the humble net, let our hearts sail lighter than our ships." The priest scolded him, but the people loved it. The prayer spread, quietly, through the harbors. Without knowing it, Rome had resurrected not its invention, but the truth of the god it had borrowed. As the empire grew older and its edges began to crumble, Glaucus watched with the patience only immortality grants. Empires, like waves, were bound to break. Yet within their ruin, he saw beauty, mosaics that survived centuries, words carved in marble that outlasted kings. The Romans had changed his story, yes, but in doing so they had preserved it. He had become myth, and myth was stronger than memory. When the last Roman fleet fell silent, when the temples sank and the harbors filled with sand, the image of Glaucus remained in shards of pottery buried beneath the ruins. Future generations would dig them up, studying his calm face and wondering who he had been. They would call him by different names: Neptune's messenger, the sea seer, the eternal mariner, but always, in some quiet corner of their hearts, they would feel what the Greeks had once known: that the ocean has a soul and that someone listens. Beneath those ruins, Glaucus drifted, his eyes closed, his pulse in rhythm with the eternal tide. The oracle's words returned to him: "Even the divine must learn to be small." He had become small, yes, invisible, forgotten, but within that smallness, he felt the vastness of everything. He smiled, whispering into the deep, "Let them remember me however they wish. Every name they give is another way of loving the sea." The waves carried his whisper along the Mediterranean coast, where it mingled with the sound of bells, gulls, and human laughter. The age of gods might have faded, but the sea remained, endless, alive, remembering. Why does every civilization resurrect the same god? The sea was calm that night, too calm for comfort. A single ship drifted under a moon the color of bone, its sails half-furled, its crew asleep except for one, a young sailor named Lycon. He sat at the prow, staring into the mirror-flat water. Every creak of timber echoed like a heartbeat. He had been at sea for months, chasing trade winds and fortune, but tonight, unease gnawed at him. The world felt hollow, as if waiting for something to rise from below. He whispered into the darkness, "Old sea, don't take me yet." The wind gave no reply. Then, faintly, he heard a sound. Not thunder, not waves. A low humming, melodic and ancient. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. His eyelids grew heavy. The stars blurred. When he opened his eyes again, he was no longer aboard the ship. He stood in a vast expanse of shallow water that reflected the heavens. The horizon bent in all directions, an ocean without depth or shore. The air shimmered with soft light, as though dawn were perpetually trying to begin. A voice spoke behind him, deep, patient, and kind. "Do not fear the stillness. It listens when the world does not." Lycon turned. There, half emerged from the water, stood a man of blue radiance. Seaweed drifted around his shoulders like a crown. His eyes were calm yet endless, mirroring every storm that had ever been and every silence that followed. "Who are you?" Lycon asked, though the question felt childish even as it left his lips. The figure smiled. "A friend to those who speak kindly to the sea." Lycon's knees weakened. "Then you are real, Glaucus." The god inclined his head. "Real enough for your dream." Lycon knelt instinctively.
Im no priast.
"I have no offering." "You have fear," Glaucus said, "and that is enough. Fear keeps you alive long enough to learn." The sailor lowered his gaze. "I don't want to die at sea." "No one truly dies in the sea," the god replied. "They return to it. The ocean keeps what it loves." Lycon frowned. "And what does it love?" "The brave, the foolish, those who listen." The silence that followed was heavy but warm. Around them, The water began to ripple with faint images. Ships sailing, storms gathering, faces smiling through foam. Lycaon realized these were not visions of the past, but of memory itself, the sea remembering every life it had ever touched. He saw a fisherman casting his net on a rocky shore. He saw a maiden laughing by the waves. He saw a sorceress weeping beneath a copper sky. And he saw Glaucus in all of them, not as a god commanding from above, but as a presence within every act of love, loss, and forgiveness the ocean had ever known. Lycaon whispered, "Is this how you see us? All of us?" Glaucus nodded. "Each tide carries your stories. Every ripple is a memory of courage. Even fear leaves its shape in the current." The young sailor looked down at his reflection. It flickered, showing him as a child, then as an old man, then gone entirely. "Then what am I now?" "A moment," said the god, "and moments are the only immortality that matters." He stepped closer, the water glowing beneath his feet. "You will wake soon, Lycaon. The storm that waits beyond your dream will test you. But remember this, the sea does not seek to destroy, only to remind. When you fear drowning, breathe deeper. When you feel alone, listen." Lycaon felt tears prick his eyes. "Listen to what?" "To me," Glaucus said softly, placing a hand over the sailor's heart. "For I am the tide that answers courage." The light around them grew brighter, filling the horizon. Lycaon tried to speak, but his voice dissolved into wind. The dream folded upon itself like a wave retreating from shore. He awoke to the crash of thunder. The ship was pitching violently, wind tearing at the sails. Sailors shouted orders, the deck slick with rain. Lycaon scrambled to his feet, clutching the mast. "Storm! From the east!" someone cried. Lightning flashed, illuminating the horizon. And for an instant, Lycaon saw it. A figure standing upon the waves, luminous and calm amid the chaos. He could not hear the voice this time, but he knew the message. He steadied his breath, guiding the wheel, shouting for the men to turn port. The ship obeyed. The waves struck, but none overturned them. The storm passed as swiftly as it had come, leaving only a faint scent of salt and stillness. When dawn arrived, the sea was glass once more. Lycaon looked down into the water, half expecting to see his reflection smiling back. Instead, a single seashell floated to the surface, glowing faintly in the morning light. He picked it up, holding it to his ear. A whisper, faint but real. "The sea listens when you do." He closed his eyes and smiled. "Thank you, Glaucus." The ship sailed on. The crew spoke for days of the miracle that spared them, though few believed the part about the glowing man on the water. But Lycaon never doubted. When he returned home, he taught his children the prayer he had learned in his dream. "Blue Father, keep my heart steady. Let me breathe with the tide, not against it." Generations later, sailors would still whisper it before setting sail, never knowing it came from a dream the sea itself had sent. And far below, Glaucus smiled. He had guided yet another soul, not with prophecy, but with presence. His work was never finished, because the ocean was endless, and so was the courage it called forth. Who watches over dreamers of the deep? The sea keeps its secrets best in lullabies, and none sang those songs better than the Nereids, the 50 daughters of Nereus and Doris, born of foam and moonlight, guardians of the sea's gentler moods. They had watched Glaucus's rise from mortal to myth, from outcast to oracle. Now, as centuries drifted by, they gathered once more to weave his story into the ocean's living memory. It began on a calm night in the Aegean. The waters shimmered silver beneath a full moon. The Nereids danced in circles near a coral meadow, their laughter soft as rain upon shells. They carried in their hands strands of seagrass, each blade glowing faintly with magic. As they moved, the grass began to twist into patterns. Not random, but purposeful, forming images. A fisherman, a goddess, a storm. "Tell it again," said the youngest, Ephra, her voice as bright as starlight through water. "Tell the story of the blue one." The eldest, Psamathe, smiled. "You mean Glaucus, the sea's sorrow and its mercy." The circle grew quiet. Even the current stilled to listen. Once, Psamathe began. He was as human as we are water. He loved a girl who feared him, trusted a witch who cursed him, and turned his heartbreak into salvation. He defied Poseidon's wrath, softened storms, and taught mortals that compassion can be stronger than fear. Yet he asks for no temple, no praise. Ephra tilted her head. Then why do we whisper his name if he no longer listens? Psamathe's eyes gleamed. Oh, child, he always listens. That is his gift. His silence is his song. The younger nymphs nodded. They knew the truth of her words. For centuries, when sailors prayed for safe passage or mothers wept for ships lost to the deep, it was not Poseidon who answered. It was the soft touch of Glaucus guiding the current, the warmth that steadied the waves. The Nereids' voices rose, each adding a verse to the old hymn. He who fell and rose in foam, carries sorrow, carries home. Guard our hearts, blue sentinel deep. Where the sea remembers, let us sleep. Their harmonies rippled through the water, carried on the backs of dolphins and the wings of gulls, reaching the edges of the known world. Sailors aboard distant ships awoke from restless dreams and swore they heard women singing beneath the hull, soft voices that promised calm if only they believed. Glaucus heard it too. Far below, in the quiet trench where he now dwelled, the song touched him like sunlight through fathoms of blue. He closed his eyes and smiled faintly. The Nereids' hymn was not worship. It was remembrance, and remembrance, he knew, was the sea's purest form of love. He rose slowly, carried by the song's current, until the faint glow of the surface trembled above. The Nereids gasped as his form broke through the light, tall, calm, crowned with kelp that drifted like a halo. The water shimmered around him as if recognizing its keeper. Little sisters, Glaucus said gently, why do you call me from the depths? Ephra darted forward, bowing playfully. Because the sea forgets too easily. We thought to remind it. And what would you remind it of? That it can weep and still be strong, Psamathe said. That even gods can love without chains. Glaucus's expression softened. You honor me with truths I did not deserve. But you earned them, said another. Every calm harbor is proof. The god laughed quietly, the sound like bubbles rising through coral caverns. Then sing, daughters of the deep. Let your song be the tide's memory, not my name. They sang again, louder this time, their melody swirling around him. It was a song of cycles, birth, loss, forgiveness, renewal. As they sang, the ocean responded. Waves formed patterns of light that spiraled outward, carrying the music to every shore. On distant coasts, fishermen paused mid-labor, staring at the sea that suddenly glowed pale blue. Mothers soothing crying children hummed unconsciously in rhythm with the unseen choir. The world, for a moment, moved in time with the sea's heartbeat. When the final note faded, Glaucus looked to the Nereids. The sea will remember, he said softly. You have given it a soul. Psamathe smiled sadly. It was you who gave it conscience, Glaucus. We only gave it voice. He bowed his head, touched beyond words. Then let this be our covenant. When the sea grows cruel again, remind it of tonight. The water stirred with warmth, an unspoken promise passing between them. The Nereids bowed low before dispersing into the dark, their forms dissolving into streaks of silver. Only Ephra lingered a moment longer. Will you ever rest, Lord of Tides? She asked. Glaucus turned his gaze toward the horizon. When the sea sleeps, child, and not before. Then he sank once more into the deep, leaving only ripples behind. The waves folded over him gently, like pages closing on a sacred story. The next morning, sailors along the Aegean awoke to find their nets heavy with fish though none had been set. They found shells glimmering on the beach, and when the wind blew across them, it carried faint music, a whisper of the Nereids' hymn. He who fell and rose in foam, carries sorrow, carries home. They told their children that it was the sea's lullaby, a promise that the water, though vast, was never heartless. And somewhere in the deepest trench, Glaucus listened, his pulse matching the rhythm of the waves. He no longer felt alone. The ocean, at last, could sing for itself. Can sorrow become sacred? The sea was sleeping, or so it seemed. Beneath the calm surface of the Strait of Messina, something ancient stirred. The currents that had once danced violently now swirled with slow, deliberate motion, like breath drawn after a long silence. For centuries, the cave had remained undisturbed, sealed in darkness, untouched by mortal or god. But even the deepest wounds remember the touch that made them. Scylla was dreaming. Her mind floated somewhere between the human and the monstrous, between memory and myth. In her dreams she stood again upon the cliffs of Boeotia, sunlight warm upon her hair, the sea stretching endless and kind. A voice called her name, gentle, familiar. She turned, expecting fear or pity, but found instead eyes that reflected the horizon itself. "Glaucus," she whispered, but as the name left her lips, the dream trembled. The cliffs shattered, the sun broke into foam, and the sea consumed her. She awoke screaming, though no sound reached the surface. The cavern walls pulsed with echoes of her cry, shaking loose fragments of coral and bone. Her many heads reared, thrashing, confused by the memory that refused to die. She should have forgotten long ago. The gods had made sure of that. Yet memory, like the tide, always returns. Above, the moon glowed red with eclipse, the sign of thresholds, when the world of light brushes the edge of shadow. The sea responded, currents reversed, whispers stirred, and through that fragile boundary, something impossible happened. The curse began to waver. Scylla's eyes, all 12, flickered, monstrous yellow softening to human green. Her limbs trembled, her heart pounding a rhythm that was not rage but recognition. The cave filled with light, faint at first, then brighter, drawn from somewhere far beyond the horizon. In that light, a figure appeared, blue, calm, luminous. Glaucus. He did not enter as a god commanding storms. He came as he once had, as a man who had loved. His gaze met hers across the dark water. "Scylla," he whispered, voice breaking like waves on stone. For the first time in an age, she understood. The name pierced through the fog of divinity and curse, touching the small, fragile soul still hidden beneath her monstrous form. "Why have you come?" Her voice was fractured, like many voices speaking through one. "Because love is patient," he said, "and patience, even in eternity, must sometimes be rewarded." She shuddered. "I am not what you remember. And yet," he said, taking a step forward, "you remember me." The silence that followed was endless, filled only by the slow pulse of the sea. Scylla's heads lowered, one by one, until only her true face remained above the water. Pale, trembling, her eyes shining with tears she no longer knew how to shed. "Circe cursed you with shape," Glaucus said softly. "But shape is not the same as soul. The soul remembers what magic cannot erase." The light around them deepened. The moon above reached its fullest eclipse, and a beam of crimson fell through the water like a column of time itself. It struck the cavern, illuminating both god and monster. Scylla raised one trembling hand, not claw but hand, and touched his face. For an instant, everything held still. The sea, the moon, the memory of sorrow. Then she whispered, "I dreamed of you, every century. I just didn't know it was you." He closed his eyes. "And I waited for you, every tide." The moment broke like glass beneath a wave. The light around her began to falter, the curse straining against the mercy that dared to challenge it. The gods above stirred. Even Poseidon felt the tremor through his throne. "She cannot stay this way," the voice of the sea murmured in the depths. "Balance must hold." Glaucus looked upward, defiant. "Then take me instead." But the sea does not barter. It remembers. The light around Scylla dimmed, but her eyes remained human, filled with an emotion more enduring than any spell: gratitude. "You gave me back my name," she said. "That is enough." Before he could speak again, the curse reclaimed her. The glow faded. Her limbs turned once more to scaled coils, her voice scattering into the echoes of the deep. Yet when the transformation was complete, something subtle remained. A change the gods could not undo. Her eyes stayed human. Glaucus stood before her, tears mingling with the salt water. "Then I will stay," he whispered, "as I always have." He swam to the edge of her cave and rested there, silent. The waves outside were calm, the storm within them finally stilled. Scylla watched him through the shadows, her monstrous form now eerily still, as if guarding him in return. Outside, the moon's eclipse began to fade, light returning to the world. The first rays of dawn touched the surface, turning the sea into gold. In that fleeting hour, two beings cursed by gods shared something the divine could never grant: peace. Far above, the Nereids whispered of what they saw. "The sea forgives," they sang, "even what it once feared." Sailors passing through the strait that morning reported strange calm. They saw no whirlpools, no crashing waves, no sign of the monster. Only a faint shimmer of blue light beneath the water and, for a heartbeat, the sound of two voices humming the same forgotten song. Glaucus's vigil continued, but it no longer felt like punishment. In the presence of the creature he had once doomed, he found redemption, not through forgiveness, but through constancy. And Scylla, though bound to darkness, had finally found her dawn. What is eternity worth without closure? Beneath the calm that followed Scylla's awakening, the ocean returned to its rhythm, an endless breathing of tides, a pulse older than the gods. Yet something within Glaucus had changed. He no longer moved through the sea as a restless guardian, nor as a punished immortal seeking redemption. He moved as a thinker. Silence, once his torment, had become his teacher. He began to ask questions, not of Olympus, not of the nymphs or oracles, but of the sea itself. The ocean did not answer in words. It replied through patterns. The curve of a wave, the migration of fish, the stillness before a storm. Each movement was an argument, each current a truth expressed without speech. In time, Glaucus came to understand what no temple inscription could teach: that wisdom was not a crown but a current, something that moved through all beings and returned to its source unseen. He drifted through coral valleys and trenches that glowed like stars. Everywhere he looked, life followed the same laws: creation, decay, renewal. Even the smallest creature knew when to let go, and in that surrender was strength. Mortals build walls, he thought, but the sea endures because it refuses to be anything but itself. He began to collect his thoughts as one might collect shells, fragments of meaning carried from shore to shore. When whales passed, he spoke with them through vibration, sharing philosophies in the language of rhythm. When he met the Nereids, they brought him riddles from the surface world. Why do men pray louder when they fear silence? Why do gods envy those who can die? To each, Glaucus offered reflection rather than answers. Perhaps, he told them, mortality is not weakness but direction. They value the fleeting because they must. One evening, while drifting through a canyon of glowing coral, Glaucus felt the presence of something vast, not divine, but elemental. The sea itself had come to listen. A low hum surrounded him, deeper than thought, resonating through every scale and bone. It was not speech, but he understood it. What are you becoming, child of both shore and sea? He smiled. Not God, not man. Perhaps just awareness. Awareness is heavier than stone, the ocean replied. Will you bear it forever? If forever means understanding, yes. Then understand this, said the voice of the deep. Even knowledge must dissolve or it becomes pride. The tide learns because it forgets. The words shook him. Pride, that old shadow, the flaw of all gods. Was even wisdom a temptation? Another form of hubris disguised as clarity? He bowed his head. Then let me forget as the tide forgets. The sea stirred, almost laughing. That is why you were chosen. Centuries passed, or perhaps none at all. Time no longer flowed linearly for Glaucus. His thoughts spread outward, absorbed by the ocean's vast intelligence. He began to notice how ideas traveled like currents. A fisherman's prayer in Greece echoed later in Egypt, reborn as poetry. A sailor's dream in Rome resurfaced centuries later as a legend among islanders far to the west. He understood then that philosophy was not confined to words. It lived in the choices beings made when no one was watching, in mercy offered, in patience tested, in the quiet refusal to despair. Once, as he floated near the surface, he overheard a sailor reciting a story to his crew. It was about a god who had once fallen in love with a mortal, who lost her, who wept until the sea turned kind. The details were wrong, but the heart was true, and Glaucus smiled. Perhaps all wisdom is misremembered truth, he mused. But if it makes the world gentler, does accuracy matter? He spent years, if such a word still applied, recording his thoughts in the only way the ocean allowed, through movement. When the current turned in a peculiar spiral, it carried meaning. When a tide came early, it hinted at reflection. Scholars in later ages would call these patterns omens, never realizing they were thoughts. His thoughts translated into water. The philosophers of Alexandria wrote of strange coincidences at sea. Tempests that struck unjust kings, calms that saved orphaned sailors. They argued whether these were miracles or lessons. Glaucus knew the truth, they were both. The ocean was not cruel. It was corrective. Each wave was a sentence. Each storm, punctuation. One day, as he wandered near the ruins of an old temple that had sunk into the sand, Glaucus found an amphora preserved by coral. Inside it lay a scroll, parchment untouched by decay, sealed tight by the sea's salt. He unfurled it carefully. It was a fragment of philosophy written by a mortal long dead. Man learns the laws of nature but forgets that he is part of them. To understand the divine is not to rise above life, but to sink deeper into it. Glaucus laughed quietly. "You knew me without knowing my name," he whispered to the bones of the thinker. "You listened to the same teacher." He replaced the scroll and let the current carry it onward, trusting it would wash ashore someday when another mind was ready to receive it. When he returned to the open sea, he felt lighter. The weight of knowledge no longer burdened him. It flowed through him like a tide that knew its own purpose. He no longer needed to ask why things happened. He only needed to bear witness that they did. The oracle's final lesson echoed in him. To understand forever is not to know all things, but to accept all things. He drifted upward until moonlight brushed his face. Around him, the ocean shimmered with phosphorescence. Millions of tiny lives glowing in unity, small lights forming one vast illumination. It looked like thought made visible. Glaucus whispered to the waves, "So this is wisdom, to be part of everything, and still at peace." The sea sighed in agreement, and for the first time since his transformation, he felt what mortals call serenity. He was no longer the fisherman who became a god, nor the god who sought forgiveness. He was the tide itself, endless, knowing, free. Is knowledge the final gift or the last curse? Every drop of water remembers. It was a truth Glaucus came to feel rather than think, the way one feels warmth through sunlight or sorrow through silence. The sea was not merely vast, it was conscious. Each current carried recollection. Every wave held the residue of emotion. Joy from the children who played along its edge, grief from the sailors it swallowed, love from the countless eyes that once gazed across its surface. He drifted through the mid-depths where light began to fade, tracing the paths of memory that glimmered faintly like veins of gold in blue stone. When he touched them, they opened into visions. Here, the laughter of ancient mariners setting sail from Rhodes, their oars rising like wings. There, the final whisper of a queen cast into the waves by her enemies, her last thought not of vengeance but of her unborn child. Deeper still, he found echoes of creatures long extinct, leviathans whose songs had sculpted the shape of the ocean floor itself. It struck him then that the sea was not the past. It was the archive of time. Everything that had ever touched it still lived within it, rearranged and retold by the tides. He remembered the oracle's warning. You will know everything that comes, but never be surprised. And yet this knowledge surprised him still. The ocean was alive with recollection, and he was its keeper. As he moved through these waters, the boundaries between memory and reality began to blur. He would rise to the surface and glimpse cities that no longer existed, phantom skylines made of mist. Sometimes he would hear voices calling names long forgotten, and when he answered, the voices laughed softly before dissolving into foam. One evening, he surfaced beneath a crimson sunset. The horizon burned gold, and for a heartbeat, he thought he saw her Scylla, standing on the distant rocks, her form human, her gaze tender. He blinked, and the vision was gone. Only the wind remained. The sea had shown him her memory, not her presence. It was both comfort and torment. "Why show me what I can never hold?" he asked aloud. The tide murmured back, "Because remembrance is how love survives death." He closed his eyes and let the waves rock him like a cradle. He realized then that memory was not punishment. It was continuation. Even the gods who fell from favor lived on as fragments of story, their essence rippling through generations of mortal thought. That was the sea's true divinity. It forgot nothing, yet forgave everything. Over time, Glaucus began to leave traces of his own memory within the currents. When sailors dreamed of calm waters, it was his peace they felt. When poets wrote of the sea's sorrow, it was his grief they heard. When lovers stood on the shore and spoke promises to the horizon, the sea carried those words down to him, and he kept them. Every oath, every wish, every tear that touched salt. He no longer feared eternity. It was no longer endless emptiness. It was an infinite collection of stories. Still, there were moments when the weight of it overwhelmed him. Too many voices at once, too many centuries crowding his thoughts. He would sink to the deepest places, where sound itself could not follow. There, in the trenches where pressure crushed even gods into stillness, he found a kind of oblivion. And in that stillness, he began to hear something new. Not the memory of what had been, but the whisper of what could be. The sea was not only memory, it was potential. Every wave that touched the shore erased the past and rewrote it in foam. Every tide was a chance to begin again. One day, as he drifted near the ruins of a temple now half buried in coral, Glaucus saw children playing along the shallows above. They laughed as they built towers of sand, only to watch them fall. Their joy was unbothered by impermanence. Perhaps, he mused, mortals understand the sea better than gods ever did. A child tossed a small shell into the water. It sank slowly, spinning. Glaucus caught it in his palm. Etched into its surface by some curious hand were words in an ancient tongue. "Everything returns." He smiled. The inscription was older than the empire whose ruins now slept on the ocean floor. Yet its truth had outlived the hands that carved it. He closed his fist, letting the shell dissolve into a shimmer of light that drifted away through the current. Yes, everything returns. Every thought, every kindness, every sin, reshaped by time and tide. And one day, even he would return. Not as a god, not as legend, but as a whisper in the water, another fragment of memory carried onward. That night, as the moon rose and painted a path across the sea, Glaucus surfaced once more. The water gleamed silver, a mirror of all that had ever been. He looked into it and saw countless reflections. His own, Scylla's, Circe's, Poseidon's, even the faces of mortals who had never known his name but had felt his touch in the calm before dawn. He realized that none of them were separate. They were one continuum, different expressions of the same story. The sea was not divided between god and mortal, divine and profane. It was one consciousness learning itself through endless forms. He whispered into the wind, "If the sea is memory, then I am its thought, and thought never dies." Lightning flickered far away, not in anger, but in acknowledgement. The deep had heard him. The waves rolled gently toward every shore in the world, carrying his words like lullabies to those who would one day wonder why the ocean seems to sigh when night falls. They would never know his name, but they would feel it, and that, Glaucus knew, was the truest immortality of all. The current that carried memory eventually carried Glaucus home. After centuries of wandering, the pull of the past grew too strong to ignore. The sea itself seemed to turn him, as if every current whispered a single word. Circe's island. He had not set eyes upon it since the night she offered him love and vengeance in the same breath. Yet time, he knew now, transformed all wounds into lessons. And so he followed the pull westward through the Ionian Sea, until a familiar shape appeared through the mist. A crescent island draped in silence, its cliffs overgrown, its once golden halls now veiled in ivy. Where once smoke had curled from chimneys and laughter echoed through the groves, only seabirds remained. The air was still heavy with memory, not decay, but reverence. A was not dead. It was dreaming. Glaucus rose from the water, stepping onto the shore with care, as if afraid to wake the ghosts that lingered there. His feet left no prints in the sand. The old path wound upward through a forest of twisted oaks. Every tree hummed faintly, saturated with remnants of magic. He could feel her presence in the roots, in the scent of crushed herbs, in the hush that held the island together. At the top of the hill stood Circe's house, half-ruined but magnificent still. Its columns leaned like weary sentinels, vines spilling from balconies. The bronze doors lay open, as though waiting. He entered. Dust motes drifted in beams of sunlight that pierced the crumbling roof. On the long table where once cauldrons simmered, only a single bowl remained, stone, uncracked, polished smooth by centuries of tides. He touched it gently. "Your hands," he murmured, "were steadier than mine ever were." The echo of his voice stirred the air. Somewhere within the shadows, a faint shimmer flared, a fragment of enchantment still alive. He followed it through the halls until he reached the inner courtyard. There, amid wildflowers and creeping moss, stood a statue, not of a goddess, not of a queen, but of a woman looking toward the horizon. One hand lifted as if in farewell. Circe. The sculptor had captured her not in power, but in peace. The corners of her lips curved faintly, not in pride but understanding. Her eyes, though carved of stone, seemed to hold light, and at her feet lay a small shell, pearlescent and whole. Glaucus knelt. "You found forgiveness before I did," he said. He lifted the shell, turning it in his palm. It pulsed softly, alive with her lingering spell. Within its spiral he heard the faintest whisper, her voice, gentle as foam. "You see, Glaucus, the sea remembers everything, even love that was never returned." He closed his eyes. "Then remember this," he whispered back. "You were loved too." He walked through the garden where once lions and wolves had lain tame at her feet. Only their descendants remained now, wild, cautious, yet unthreatening. They circled him briefly, as if recognizing an echo of the magic that had once ruled them. One approached, nose touching his hand before padding away. Glaucus sat beneath an olive tree, its branches heavy with fruit. From here, he could see the sea glittering below, endless and patient. He realized that every lesson he had learned, mercy, transformation, acceptance, had begun here, in this place of temptation and consequence. The island was not cursed. It was a mirror. He reached into the sand beside him and drew a small flower from the water's edge, coral in color, delicate in form. With a thought, he hardened its stem, shaping it into a keepsake. He placed it before Circe's statue. "A gift for a teacher," he said, "for what you gave and for what you took." The breeze stirred in reply, carrying the scent of sage and salt. He smiled. For a while, he simply sat there, watching sunlight ripple through the ruined courtyard. A had once been a prison of pride. Now it was sanctuary. Even in decay, it breathed wisdom. Perhaps, he thought, all places touched by sorrow eventually become temples of understanding. As the sun lowered, Glaucus rose and walked back toward the shore. The sea waited, calm as glass. Before stepping into it, he turned once more to look at the island. He saw not ruins but transformation, proof that time does not destroy, it refines. He whispered to the horizon, "Sleep well, Circe. The tides will keep your story." When he entered the water, it welcomed him like an old friend. The coral flower he had left behind shimmered faintly, and from it rose a small pulse of light, drifting upward until it broke the surface, where it burst into a single radiant wave that spread outward across the sea. Far away, sailors felt the water shift beneath their hulls and marveled at its sudden warmth. None knew that a god had visited an island of ghosts and left forgiveness behind. In the depths, Glaucus swam slower now, thoughtful. He had revisited every chapter of his existence, from mortal man to mythic guardian, from foolish lover to philosopher of tides. Yet each place he returned to felt new, remade by perspective. That was the secret the sea kept from both mortals and gods. There is no true return, only rediscovery. He looked back one final time. A shimmered faintly in the distance, golden in the dying light. Then the mist swallowed it whole, leaving only the calm horizon. He whispered to himself, "The past does not drown. It rests beneath the waves until we are ready to see it clearly." The current pulled him onward, gentle but insistent, toward the unknown waters that waited ahead. Can the past truly rest beneath the waves? The ocean is older than gods, but even it carries secrets too ancient for words. In its deepest vaults, beyond light and sound, something slept, vast as a mountain, patient as time. Sailors whispered of it as the Leviathan, the first child of chaos, born before Poseidon ever claimed dominion. Few believed it real, and fewer still survived its passing. But Glaucus knew. The sea itself had called him to it. He descended into the dark where pressure crushed even myth into silence. Here, there were no currents, no movement, only a stillness so immense it hummed. He followed the hum, each pulse slower than a heartbeat, until it grew into a rhythm that seemed to shape reality itself. And then he saw it. The creature lay coiled upon itself, an endless spiral of living stone. Its scales were etched with the memory of the world, symbols older than Olympus, older even than the idea of gods. One great eye opened, gold and endless, reflecting Glaucus not as he was but as he had once been, mortal, fragile, curious. He hovered before it, unafraid. "Leviathan," he said, "I seek no dominion, only truth." The voice that answered was not sound but vibration, a chorus felt within bone and soul. "Truth is not given, seaborn. It is remembered. I have remembered everything the ocean has shown me," Glaucus said. "Its mercy, its hunger, its sorrow." "Then you know nothing," the voice replied gently. "For to remember only the sea is to forget the silence that made it." The Leviathan's body shifted, stirring the abyss. Vast currents spiraled outward like galaxies in water. Glaucus was carried into the motion, surrounded by visions that bloomed across the dark. The birth of stars reflected on waves, the first creatures rising from the deep, the forming of continents, the drowning of empires. It was not history, it was continuity. He understood. The sea was not simply life. It was the space between beginnings. When the vision faded, he found himself resting upon the creature's immense brow. As I watched him still, calm, knowing. "Why show me this?" he asked. "Because you are the sea's conscience," it replied. "And conscience must remember not only creation, but cost." Glaucus bowed his head. "Then teach me." The Leviathan's breathing deepened, the sound rising into something like a melody, deep, resonant, infinite. It was music too large for mortal instruments, yet the ocean itself began to echo it. Whales joined the song, then dolphins, then the current itself. The melody rippled upward through the layers of water until it reached the surface, where sailors miles apart lifted their heads, sensing it in the stillness. No one could name it, but those who heard it never forgot. The sound filled them with a strange peace, an understanding that life was small but sacred. Beneath them, Glaucus listened. Each note seemed to carve itself into his being, aligning his pulse with the rhythm of creation. When the final chord faded, he whispered, "So this is the sea's oldest truth." "Yes," said the Leviathan, "that all things sing, even those that cannot speak. The current has its melody, the choral its harmony, the silence its refrain. You, Glaucus, are the pause between them, the breath that allows the song to endure." He was quiet for a long time. "If all things sing, then what is the song about?" "Existence," it replied simply. "It is not a song about the world. It is the world." The creature's body began to coil again, returning to its rest. Its enormous head lowered until Glaucus could see his reflection rippling across one golden eye. Guard the silence as you have guarded the waves. When the world grows loud, remind it to listen. The light in the Leviathan's eye dimmed. Slowly, it vanished back into the abyss, leaving Glaucus suspended in the calm it left behind. The hum remained, softer now, eternal, vibrating through the ocean like a heartbeat. When he rose back toward the surface, the sea around him was alive with song. Whales crooned through the currents. Schools of fish moved like melodies, their silver bodies catching light as if notes written upon invisible water. Even the wind above seemed to hum, its voice threaded with the echoes of that cosmic tune. Glaucus emerged beneath a dawn painted in gold. The surface glittered like a mirror of heaven, and he knew he had heard something no god or man had known before. Not prophecy, not warning, but truth. The sea was not his to command, nor was it a kingdom. It was a symphony, and he was one instrument among many. He looked to the horizon. "Leviathan," he said softly, "I will remember your song." And as he spoke, the water stirred in answer, not in words, but in rhythm, the same rhythm that had once carried the creation of worlds. He swam forward, humming faintly, his voice merging with the sea's eternal music. Those who sailed the following days reported strange calm and strange beauty, tides that rose to melody, winds that pulsed with tempo, stars that seemed to dance with the waves. They did not know that the ocean was singing through its keeper, teaching every living thing to move in harmony once more. Far below, the Leviathan dreamed again, its lullaby echoing through all existence, the sound of creation continuing, unbroken, unending. What if the divine exists in everything that endures? There are places even the Leviathan's song cannot reach, places where sound itself folds into silence. Glaucus drifted there now, drawn by instinct rather than will, to the final frontier of the sea, the abyssal mirror. No light, no movement, no life, only depth. It was said that even the gods avoided it, for in its black surface, one could see not the face, but the truth behind it. He descended for what felt like days, though time had no meaning here. The water thickened into something that was almost solid. His heartbeat slowed until it matched the faint thrum of the deep. At last, he touched a floor of obsidian sand, smooth and glass-like, reflecting nothing, and yet everything. The mirror waited. He looked down and saw himself, not the shimmering blue god who had outlived empires, but the fisherman he once was. Barefoot, humble, eyes wide with wonder. The mortal he had long buried stared back, breathing softly through the reflection. Glaucus reached toward it. The moment his hand touched the surface, it rippled outward, and the world fractured into infinite selves. He saw the man who never ate the grass and lived a quiet mortal life, dying with his family beside him. He saw the god who rejected Circe and was slain for defiance. He saw the monster who drowned the world in grief, unable to forgive himself. He saw the sage who became the sea itself, dissolving into waves until no trace of identity remained. Each vision passed like a heartbeat. Each possibility was true. Then the reflection spoke, not aloud, but within him. You search for peace in the ocean, Glaucus, but you cannot find it until you forgive the man who made you. He froze. The man who made me? The fisherman, the one who reached for what was forbidden, the one who chose. He wanted to deny it, to blame fate, the gods, Circe, the sea. But the mirror would not allow lies. The silence was merciless. He knelt, the weight of centuries pressing on his shoulders. "Yes," he whispered. "It was I, my choice, my hunger. I wanted more than what life had given me." The reflection softened, becoming the boy he once was, casting nets in golden dawnlight. And was that sin, Glaucus? Or was it hope? He hesitated. Both. The boy smiled. Then forgive both. Glaucus closed his eyes. For the first time in ages, he felt human again. Fragile, finite, yet free. Every mistake, every heartbreak, every wave of regret dissolved into something smaller, something beautiful. Acceptance. When he opened his eyes, the mirror was no longer black. It glowed faintly, silver and calm. Within it, he saw the faces of everyone his journey had touched: Scylla, Circe, Nereus, the sailors who prayed his name, even the Leviathan's golden eye. None accused him. All watched in silence, waiting. He whispered, "Then this is what eternity means. Not endless time, but endless understanding." The reflection nodded, its voice echoing like the tide. To know yourself is to know the sea. He reached forward again, and this time the mirror did not resist. It rippled once more, and he stepped through it. On the other side, he found not darkness but light, soft, endless and formless. He drifted within it, weightless. Every current of the ocean ran through him, and every thought of his became water. He was no longer in the sea, he was the sea. When he awoke, if awakening was even the right word, he floated in the upper shallows, the sun glowing warm above. He had no memory of how he had risen. Perhaps he had not risen at all. Perhaps the mirror had never existed outside of himself. He raised his hand. The skin shimmered not blue, but translucent, filled with light. For the first time, he realized there was no longer a boundary between mortal and divine, memory and being. A pod of dolphins circled him playfully, and he laughed, a sound that startled even him. "So this," he said softly, "is what it means to become whole." Above, the clouds moved in spirals that mirrored the depths below. The same pattern existed in everything, in storms, in dreams, in the pulse of hearts. The ocean whispered to him in countless voices, overlapping yet harmonious. The echoes of the dead, the prayers of the living, the thoughts of creatures unseen. And through it all flowed one truth. The sea was not chaos. It was consciousness. It remembered because it loved. Glaucus floated upon that realization until the boundary between himself and everything else dissolved completely. He understood now why the Leviathan had called him the pause between songs. It was never about silence or solitude, it was about balance. Between mortality and eternity, between grief and grace, between what is and what must be let go. As dusk fell, a fisherman on a small boat nearby saw something strange upon the water. A man-shaped shimmer of light, neither ghost nor reflection. The figure raised a hand in blessing before fading into the horizon. The fisherman returned to shore that night and told the tale to anyone who would listen. By morning, it had become a legend. The sea looked into itself and found peace. The ocean was calm for 7 days after. No storms, no wrecks, no deaths at sea. Only stillness, as though the waves themselves were breathing easier. In the heart of the abyss, where the mirror once stood, a single pearl now rested, flawless, round, and faintly glowing. Those who dove deep enough to glimpse it never took it, fearing its light would vanish if touched. They said it was the soul of a god who learned to forgive himself, still watching over the silence below. And the sea, reflecting both heaven and abyss, slept content. Who are we once all stories are told? Legends, like tides, never die, they simply change form. After the mirror of the abyss, the ocean grew quieter, wiser. But silence has a way of giving birth to stories. And from those stories came a new rumor, carried in whispers from ship to ship. Children of the sea, beings neither mortal nor god, born of Glaucus's tears. It began with fishermen who swore that on nights when the water glowed silver, they saw shapes moving beneath the surface. Shapes too graceful for fish, too human for beasts. Their laughter echoed faintly, musical yet mournful. Sailors who fell overboard claimed that soft hands caught them before the waves could take them. None could say whether these were spirits or dreams, but all agreed on one thing: the ocean had grown gentle. One such tale told of a boy from Rhodes who fell into the sea during a storm. When he awoke on the shore at dawn, he remembered nothing, except a voice that said, "You are not lost. You are remembered." In his palm was a small shell, glowing faintly blue. When his village heard, they called it the blessing of Glaucus. Soon, the coastal people began leaving offerings at the tide's edge. Nets mended with coral thread, lamps lit with whale oil, small carvings of children playing among waves. In return, the storms lessened. Ships found their way home. And sometimes, when the moon was full, the sea seemed to hum like a lullaby. But these were not just blessings. They were signs. Far below, Glaucus drifted through calm waters that shone faintly with light. A light not his own. In the distance, he saw them. Slender figures moving through the current like fragments of dawn. Their eyes were soft, their skin the color of moonlit shells, and each bore a faint blue mark over the heart. The same hue as his. He watched them with awe. They were not his in body, but in essence, the living echoes of his compassion, shaped by the sea's memory. Each carried a fragment of his consciousness, his empathy, his sorrow transformed into grace. One approached him, her hair flowing like seaweed caught in sunlight. "Father," she said, her voice a ripple rather than a sound. The word startled him. No one had called him that since the gods stripped him of his mortal life. He looked into her eyes and saw all the centuries reflected there. "What are you?" he asked gently. "We are what you left behind," she said. "Your mercy made us. We are the kindness that the sea could not forget." Glaucus's heart swelled. "Then the ocean has forgiven me?" She smiled faintly. "The ocean never needed to. You forgave it first." Around them, the others gathered, children of tide and memory. One held a conch shell that glowed like a lantern. Another carried strands of kelp woven into patterns that pulsed with color. They moved with the rhythm of currents, their laughter like wind through reeds. He felt both humbled and uplifted. For the first time, he saw what immortality could create when shaped by love instead of fear. Over time, these children spread through the waters of the world. They became the unseen guardians of sailors, rescuing those who fell, guiding lost ships with trails of light. They whispered comfort to whales in migration and to coral reefs trembling under the weight of storms. When volcanoes erupted beneath the sea, they soothed the earth with cool currents. They were not gods, yet not mere spirits. They were continuity itself, the bridge between mortal gratitude and divine patience. From above, humankind began to sense their presence. Fishermen reported strange, glowing shapes swimming beside their boats. Mothers swore they heard laughter in seashells. Children claimed that when they cried near the water, the tide rose to meet them gently, as though to wipe away their tears. And so the myth of Glaucus changed once again. The blue god of sorrow became Glaucus the giver, the sea's eternal heart. Where once he had been feared, now he was beloved. Priests of the New Age spoke of him not as a deity to appease, but as a spirit of empathy that dwelled within every wave. One night, Glaucus gathered his children upon a coral plateau glowing like the inside of a pearl. "You are the song that came after silence," he told them. "But every song must be heard to live. Go to the shores, the rivers, the estuaries, anywhere the sea touches land. Let the mortals remember that the ocean listens." His eldest, the one who had first called him father, asked, "And you? Will you come with us?" Glaucus smiled. "No. The sea needs a memory as much as it needs a voice. I will remain where stories return to begin again." They bowed, touching their foreheads to the water before dispersing into the currents. One by one, they vanished into the dark, leaving trails of light that curved like constellations beneath the waves. As the last one disappeared, Glaucus whispered, "Be gentle, the world forgets easily." Then, as if in reply, the sea shimmered with thousands of faint glows, his children's light stretching outward, reaching every horizon. Years later, when storms grew violent and tempests raged, sailors still survived against impossible odds. They said soft hands had pulled them upward, or warm light had guided them to safety. No one ever saw the beings responsible, but all agreed on what they felt: peace. And on quiet nights, when the ocean was still, if one pressed an ear to a shell, they could hear faint laughter echoing within, a sound like distant waves and joy intertwined. Those were the children of Glaucus, guardians of mercy, proof that even from tragedy, creation can sing. Beneath it all, Glaucus listened, smiling as the tide hummed their song back to him, proud of what sorrow had birthed. Can myths give birth to hope? Every civilization eventually looks backward, trying to decipher the footsteps of its own forgotten gods. Centuries after Glaucus's name faded from living prayer, the Greeks had become historians of their own myths, builders of temples to memories. Yet the sea, ever patient, had kept one secret untouched beneath the navel of the world. It began with an earthquake. Delphi, the city of prophecy, trembled for the first time in 1,000 years. Scholars rushed to inspect the sacred caverns of the oracle, fearing that Apollo's voice had fallen silent. But the tremors did not come from the mountain. They came from below, from where the rock met the underground sea. In the collapse that followed, a group of explorers descended through a newly opened fissure. Their torches revealed a narrow tunnel glistening with salt. It wound downward for miles until it opened into a vast chamber filled with shimmering water. The air was thick with the scent of brine and old incense. When they lowered their lamps, the reflection on the walls took their breath away. Mosaics, but not of Apollo, not of the Olympians. Before them stretched a panorama of oceanic gold and turquoise. Scenes depicting a man with blue skin rising from the waves, his hand extended toward a monstrous woman with 12 serpentine legs. Around them swirled dolphins, coral, and ships tossed on seas that gleamed with glassy precision. Above the figures, an inscription curved like the arc of a wave, Glaucus, memory of the sea. The scholars stared, speechless. Here, in the heart of Delphi, land of light, prophecy, and order, was a temple to a forgotten god of the deep. And its artistry was unlike anything mortal hands could create. The colors seemed alive, the water beneath the mosaics glowing as though lit from within. One of them, a young woman named Dion, stepped closer. These tiles, they breathe. Her mentor, an aging priest, whispered, "No, they remember." When they returned to the surface, their discovery sent waves through the scholarly world. The priests of Apollo forbade further exploration, calling it heresy. Yet the dream had already spread. People began to speak again of Glaucus, the fisherman god, the sea's philosopher, the forgotten oracle. Poets revived his story. Mariners painted his likeness on their sails. Even the philosophers of Athens began debating his meaning. Was he real? Allegory? A reflection of humankind's yearning for redemption through nature? But Dion could not let it rest. The memory of that underwater light haunted her. She returned alone, descending through the fissure at dusk. The deeper she went, the more the sea seemed to glow. When she reached the chamber, she found the water undisturbed, but the mosaics shimmered faintly, as though waiting for her. She knelt at the edge of the pool and whispered, "If you are real, show me." The water trembled. A low hum filled the cavern, the same tone the Leviathan once sang in the deepest trenches, the note that balanced creation itself. Dion gasped as the pool brightened. From its center rose a figure made entirely of light and water. Serene, blue, translucent. "Who calls me?" the voice asked, soft yet infinite. "Glaucus," she breathed. "The world has forgotten you." The figure smiled faintly. "Then let it remember gently." He stepped closer, the ripples forming a bridge beneath his feet. "You seek prophecy," he said, "but prophecy belongs to those who fear tomorrow. What you need is remembrance, to see that all things have already been." Dion's heart pounded. "Then why show yourself now, after so many centuries?" "Because memory awakens when the world forgets kindness," he said. "It is the sea's way of teaching balance again." The cavern shimmered brighter. Images flickered across the walls. Circe's island, Scylla's gaze, the Leviathan's song, the children of light. Every chapter of his existence replayed in fragments of water and light. Dion watched, tears streaming down her face. It was not a vision, it was truth retold by the ocean itself. When it ended, Glaucus's image began to fade. "Tell them," he said, "not to worship me, but to listen. The sea still speaks in every silence." Then he was gone. Dion returned to Delphi transformed. She wrote her account in quiet secrecy, disguising it as philosophy rather than revelation. In her final passage, she wrote, The sea holds no gods, only memories of what the divine once felt like. And if we listen closely, even our hearts beat in the rhythm of its tide. Her writings survived through centuries of copying and translation. In time, scholars debated her meaning, calling her the last philosopher of Delphi. None knew her story was not invention but encounter. And beneath Delphi's ruins, the hidden shrine remained untouched. The pool still glowed faintly in the dark. Travelers who camped near the mountain at night sometimes swore they heard water echoing through the stone. Soft, rhythmic, like breathing. Some said it was the mountain's veins shifting after the quake. Others said it was the god beneath, dreaming still. Far below, Glaucus stood once more before the mosaic, his own image worn but radiant. He traced the inscription gently. "Memory of the sea," he murmured. "So that is what I've become." He smiled, not with pride but peace. "Then let memory be my temple, and compassion my altar." As he turned, the chamber filled with soft light that pulsed with every beat of the world above. The waters shimmered, recording once again not worship, but awareness. And the sea, faithful historian of all things, continued its endless work, keeping memory alive so that understanding could return when the world was ready. When myth becomes archaeology, what truth survives? Centuries passed. The gods fell silent. Their temples eroded. Their names reduced to dust and poetry. Empires turned to ruins, and new faiths rose on their bones. Yet the sea remained vast, patient, remembering. And deep within that endless memory, Glaucus still drifted. He had become something more than divine, a presence so interwoven with the ocean that even the smallest ripple carried a trace of his essence. But above, on the mortal shore, no one spoke his name anymore. The last temples had crumbled. The last hymn had faded. For the first time in millennia, Glaucus wondered whether he, too, would be forgotten completely. But myths, like tides, have a way of returning when least expected. Far away, on a quiet beach in a forgotten corner of the Aegean, a child named Lyra walked barefoot along the surf. She was small, curious, and known for her habit of talking to seashells. Her village thought it a harmless oddity, a girl's imagination, nothing more. Each morning she searched for new shells, holding them to her ear as though listening for the heartbeat of the world. One afternoon, after a storm, she found one unlike any other, large, spiral-shaped, shimmering faintly with iridescent blue. The moment she lifted it, she felt warmth pulse through her fingers, as though the shell were alive. When she pressed it to her ear, she didn't hear the sea's usual roar. Instead, a voice, calm, deep, and kind. "Do not be afraid." Lyra froze. "Who's there?" "An old friend of the ocean," the voice replied. "The sea has stories. You've just learned how to listen." She blinked, glancing around. The beach was empty except for gulls and wind. "Are you inside the shell?" "In a way," the voice said. "Once I lived among gods, but now I live wherever someone listens to the sea with an open heart." The child smiled, unafraid. "Then you must be lonely. No one listens much anymore." The voice chuckled, soft as foam. "Not lonely, little one, only waiting." That night, Lyra took the shell home and placed it beside her bed. As the moonlight spilled through her window, she whispered questions into it. About storms, about whales, about why the sea never slept. And each time, the voice answered. It told her of a fisherman who had once loved too deeply, of a witch who wept for her cruelty, of monsters who were never truly monsters at all. The stories were vivid, filled with color and sorrow and grace. Lyra began to draw them in the sand each morning. Spirals of waves, blue-skinned figures, dolphins and lilies. The villagers watched in wonder, whispering that perhaps the sea had chosen her. One evening, she asked, "Are you the god from the stories? The one who lived beneath the waves?" "I was," said the voice, "but names fade, and that is how they learn to rest." She frowned. "But if no one remembers you, won't you disappear?" The shell hummed. "If even one person carries a story in their heart, the story is alive. Memory does not need temples, only listeners. Days turned into weeks. Lyra grew more attuned to the ocean's moods. She knew when storms were coming before clouds appeared, and when fish would gather near the shore. Fishermen began to consult her, trusting her strange intuition. One morning, a great wave rose on the horizon, not of destruction, but of shimmering calm. When it reached the shore, it left behind thousands of shells, each whispering faintly when held close. The villagers gathered in awe. "It's a blessing," they said. "A miracle." Lyra smiled quietly. "No, it's a message." That night, she sat beside the tide, the original shell in her lap. "Will they hear you too?" she asked. "Perhaps," the voice answered. "Or perhaps they will hear only the sound of their own longing." Every ear translates truth differently. Lyra tilted her head. "And what truth should they find?" "That the sea is alive," said the voice. "And that kindness is the current that carries everything." She hesitated, her voice trembling. "Will I ever meet you?" "You already have." The water shimmered faintly, and for an instant, she saw a tall figure standing on the horizon, blue, radiant, watching her. His gaze held the softness of ages, the stillness of understanding. Then the vision dissolved into mist. As years passed, Lyra's legend grew. Travelers came from distant lands to hear the child who spoke with the sea. She became a teacher, then a keeper of the coastal shrine built near her home, not of stone or gold, but of driftwood and coral. In its center rested the shell, still faintly glowing. She never revealed the voice's name, not even on her deathbed. But when she passed, the shell was placed beside her, and as the tide rose to claim it, the sea whispered through the village one final time, a lullaby that wrapped every ear in peace. "Breathe in, wanderer. The tide remembers you." The next morning, the shell was gone, carried out to sea. But its whisper did not vanish. Children along distant shores would later claim that if you listen closely, any shell can speak, sometimes faintly, sometimes clear. And though they could not know it, what they heard was the last echo of Glaucus, the god who had become memory, now scattered across the world. Far beneath, in the stillness of the abyss, Glaucus stirred. The voices of mortals drifted down like sunlight through water. Songs, prayers, laughter, all touched by the rhythm he had left behind. He smiled. "So the sea still sings," he murmured. And as the tide turned once more, his form dissolved into the currents completely. There was no boundary now between God and ocean, memory and myth. He had become the whisper that lived in every shell, every wave, every silence between storms. The fisherman had finally come home. Has the god finally found rest? The sea was quiet, not the quiet of absence, but of completion. The endless cycle of rise and fall, of song and silence, had slowed into harmony. It was as if the world itself had exhaled after holding its breath for 1,000 years. In the depths where sunlight died and eternity began, Glaucus drifted, no longer a form, no longer a god. He was rhythm, pulse, and memory. The sea's slow heartbeat matched his own, and through it he could feel every living thing. The sway of kelp forests, the gentle struggle of a newborn turtle, the still reverence of coral after moonrise. All of it was him, and yet none of it belonged to him. This, he understood, was the end of becoming. Once he had sought transformation through desire, then through wisdom, then through forgiveness. Now there was nothing left to seek. In stillness, he found what neither Olympus nor prophecy had ever taught: peace without purpose. Above him, the moon's reflection rippled across the surface like a moving mirror. The tides rose to meet it in slow reverence, each wave folding into the next as if bowing in prayer. Every motion was deliberate, ancient, perfect. He remembered what the Leviathan had said long ago. The song is not about the world. It is the world. And now the song was finishing its final note. From the coasts of distant lands, people felt it. A subtle calm that settled over every ocean. The waves that had once thundered against the cliffs now kissed them softly. Storms that had brewed in rage dissipated without cause. Fishermen found their boats guided safely home by unseen currents. Scholars could not explain it. Poets, though, whispered that the sea had gone to sleep. But in that stillness, there was no death, only communion. Glaucus sensed everything that had ever touched water. The tears of lovers, the sweat of builders, the rain that fell on newborns, the blood spilled in battle. The sea had taken it all without judgment, cleansing not by erasing, but by remembering. Now he felt it release, not forgetting but forgiving. Every drop of salt water, every trace of sorrow, released like a final breath. The ocean was learning what he had learned, that to rest is not to end, but to trust that nothing needs to be carried anymore. Slowly, the currents began to fade into stillness. Even the sound of water ceased. Only vibration remained, deep, continuous, steady. It was the heartbeat of creation itself. Glaucus let himself drift deeper, his form dissolving into faint light. His eyes closed, though he no longer needed them to see. His mind unfolded, spreading through the sea like ink through clear water. He was not Glaucus the fisherman, nor Glaucus the god. He was simply awareness, drifting between time and timelessness. Far above, a child stood at the edge of a quiet shore, holding a shell, the same one that Lyra once carried, now polished smooth by centuries of waves. She lifted it to her ear. "Do you hear it?" her mother asked. The child nodded. "It's not the sea," she whispered. "It's breathing." The woman smiled softly, though she did not understand. The child pressed the shell closer. Within it, she heard the faintest sound. Not words, but the rhythm of waves, calm and endless. It was the voice of the sea itself, patient and alive. That night, she dreamed of standing beneath the water, surrounded by light that felt like warmth. A man of shimmering blue smiled at her, placing his hand on her heart. No words were spoken, but she understood. The sea remembers kindness. When she awoke, the tide had left a line of small shells outside her window, arranged in a perfect spiral. In the deep, Glaucus felt it too, that dream, that moment of connection. His consciousness pulsed like gentle surf. It was his final act, to ensure that the sea would always whisper comfort to those who listened, that mortals would still feel peace when the tide brushed their feet, that every story, every life, every love would be reflected somewhere in the eternal rhythm of the water. He thought of Scylla, of Circe, of the oracle, of his children of light. They had all become waves in the same current. He had not lost them. He had become the space that held them. He smiled, though his smile was now the glint of sunlight across a morning sea. "We are all the tide," he whispered, rising, falling, returning. The ocean echoed back softly, folding around him like an embrace. His essence expanded until it filled every depth, every ripple, every rain cloud waiting to fall. There was no more separation, between sea and sky, between God and mortal, between story and silence. At the edge of the horizon, dawn began to rise. For a moment, the world seemed motionless, the sea perfectly still, like a mirror between creation and reflection. Then, slowly, the first wave stirred, rolling forward as if guided by unseen hands. It was not an ending. It was the breath after completion, the sigh of a universe at peace. And deep below, where no light reached, the last trace of Glaucus shimmered once, like a star dissolving in water. His final thought moved through every current, through every shore. "Be gentle, for even the waves grow tired." The sea answered in silence, then began its eternal rhythm anew. The tides moved again, slower, softer, wiser. The ocean had learned stillness, and in that stillness, Glaucus finally slept. And so the tide withdraws, carrying the last memory of a fisherman who dreamed too deeply. If your thoughts drift upon the waves tonight, may you hear his song in the hush of the sea. Sleep well, until the next story calls from beneath the horizon.